All right, good evening, everybody. It's now 6 o'clock. This is the Community Consolidated School District 59 Committee of the Whole meeting. I'd like to remind all board members and those other speakers tonight to be sure to speak loudly as we are Zooming this, and we will be live on YouTube. So please bear with us, as this will be one of the first times we've actually Zooming in people for discussions and YouTubing it and having a live meeting. So we may have one or two hiccups, hopefully not too many. But with that, can we have roll call, please?
Espino.
Present.
Lang.
Present.
Mencia.
Present.
Petrelli. Present. Reed.
Present.
Sager.
Present.
Schumacher.
Present.
And we're all here.
Okay, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. We are on to item 4.0, comments and suggestions from the public. Is there anyone here that's come here to speak before the board? And no one has signed up. With that, we'll begin with item 5.0, special interest topics. Before we begin, I want to mention to everyone that we're only going to be reviewing the results of the audit. We're not going to be talking about possible solutions, stuff like that. We're just going to be understanding all the information that has been presented in these three reports that we've read. It's a lot of information, and I think it takes some time for us all to digest it before we even talk about solutions. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bresnahan and her team.
All right, thank you so much, Randy. So I'm going to pull up our presentation. If I could get my Zoom audience members to give me a thumbs up that they can see my screen okay? Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to put this into slideshow format and minimize this for 1 minute. Okay, so before we begin our presentation tonight, it's really evolved over time. While we anticipated originally just really looking at one aspect, our equity opportunity review with DM Group, it's really evolved and really nicely aligned. So we do have 3 reports that we will be reviewing tonight. We will have some housekeeping things where we will take breaks as needed. It is a lot of information and some pretty hefty information, so we want to assure that our board members stay engaged and have breaks as needed, so we'll kind of build in a couple breaks where we can stretch a little bit. We are also in between each of the presentation segments. We will allow for questions from the board to ask anything that they need clarity on or further information on. Tonight we'll have our DM group representatives with us, so while they are here, there will be an opportunity. You can ask questions of them. You can ask questions of our SLT members. We also have some of our Equity Coalition members with us tonight. So we hope that those clarifying questions will be used in between each of the report presentations. And then at the end of the meeting, when all of the information has been shared from all 3 reports, that's when we will engage in a discussion around what did we see, what were our takeaways, what are our wonderings, what are things that we still have questions about that we want to gather more information on, and really hopefully end with a clear sense of purpose around what our issues are, what further information do we need to identify additional problems or situations that we want to address, and then really navigate a timeline for allowing the administration and the district to further explore and then start looking into solutions from that lens. So tonight is not looking at solutions and presenting solutions. It's sitting with the data, identifying what our issues are there issues, are there inequities, and then engaging in dialogue so we have a clear sense of direction and purpose as we start to engage with the community, engage with our staff, gather more information, and hopefully lead to some long-term solutions to help us reach our goals. So with that, any questions on the purpose of tonight's meeting for our board members? For our audience members, it's important to note that we have 3 full reports. All of these reports will be made available to our public when the board update goes out tomorrow. We are also working on having them translated, which is, as you can imagine, pretty lengthy because these are some pretty hefty reports. But we will have them available in our multiple languages as well, and they will be available on our website. All of our board members have had advanced copies of these so that they are prepared to engage in the conversation with us tonight. But hopefully our audience will really see a great summary and analysis that was really outlined in the reports and an opportunity to see the information firsthand. So with that, we'll begin the first portion of the presentation. Really, I want to just commend this district because this is challenging work to talk about equity and to engage in some a different lens at how we look at our own data. And this work and the purpose of this work really started long before I got here. And so we want to have some clarity that this is work that is based on the community's input. So with that, I want to draw us back to our strategic plan. And as we've reignited our strategic plan with the board, we have really focused back on what are our values in our community. And so we pulled this up from our strategic plan, where District 59 is committed to the following core values: whole child, growth, ownership, continuous improvement, communication, collaboration. Number 4, diversity and equity. It's right there. And then number 5, partnership and stewardship. And as we look through the data today, you are going to see evidence of all of these values coming forward in the work that we're doing. And you're going to be asked the question, does our data align to these values that our community has agreed upon? And that's really going to help us engage into finding out what are the issues that we want to address. It also, equity really presented itself in our strategic plan as part of goal area number 4. So while it's an underlying component of everything we do, it was explicitly stated as a goal in goal number 4. And if you look at the high-level multi-year strategy, it's equity across schools. Ensure all students have equity in access to curriculum, resources, staffing, facility space, schedules, and time to best meet their individual needs. That is a lofty and very explicit goal. So we are not talking, when we hear equity, you may think race, ethnicity, demographics. But as you can see, we are talking about a broader definition of equity to really ensure that our system is designed to provide all of these things in an equitable way based on the individual needs of our students. So we first kind of have to have a conversation about what does equity mean? And this is actually something that when I was interviewing for this position, I was able to use as part of my presentation, because this is something that I value deeply personally, but also I see it within our school system professionally, and equity has a place in all that we do. And I think that what is one of the things that drew me to District 59, because this was already identified as an area that we wanted to work towards. So when we think about equity, we can start with the conversation around, well, let's first identify what is inequality? Do we have inequalities in our system? And this, of course, being an educator, you might recognize as illustrations from the Giving Tree. And it kind of depicts what inequality is. It's unequal access to opportunities. So one child is receiving the apples, one child is not. Basic analogy for inequality. Then we reach equality as a first step. So we give each child a tool to better access the opportunities. But as you can see in this picture, have we resolved the issue for what the children are receiving? One child is still getting apples and the other child is not, because they both received the same tool, the same size ladder. So now when we're talking about equity, now we have to look at how do we customize our tools? How do we differentiate our resources so that each child can get to what they need? So now you can see one child has the bigger ladder, one child has a smaller ladder. They both have some access. Now we're going to take it one step further in this analogy, because while we talk about equity, we're also really leading towards what we are now calling justice in our system. Because as you can see here, it's not about fixing the tool or providing the different tools. It's about fixing the system itself. So if the tree look different than it did in the previous slides. Now do we have greater access to the resources that the kids need? We could even go into further conversations about, well, do all kids need apples? Do they need the same number of apples? These are the types of things, right, that we really are going to dig deep into tonight. But when I say equity, these are the things I want you to keep in mind. It's not just about everybody getting the same. It's about everybody getting what they need in order to get the resources and the access to those opportunities. So the question is, why now? Why are we embarking on this work, and why are we going to be faced with asking ourselves some challenging questions? Well, first, we already laid out, it's part of our strategic plan. The community decided through a pretty extensive work that equity meant something to us in this community. And so we want to honor that, and we've already embarked on a lot of that work in year one of the strategic plan. We've also seen some strong indication from our community that there are things that we need to fix, things that we need to take a deeper look at. You've heard public comment. You've heard through committee works. We've heard the voice from our families, from our students, from our staff, and we have to use that as a good indication of what we need to address. And then the last point is actually something that's really timely. The Illinois State Board of Education is actually going to include, starting in the fall of '22, a new component on our report cards called the Equity Journey Continuum, where all school districts and schools will actually be measured against specific criteria to determine how equitable they are in serving their students. So this isn't just a District 59 thing. This isn't just a Terry Bresnahan thing. This is truly the work that we in public education are addressing. It is timely, it is relevant, and it is needed. So to quote Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better. And then when you know better, now we got to do better. So tonight, the hope is that we're going to figure out what the issues are so that we can do better. So just a quick refresher on the timeline. Back fall 2019, pre-pandemic, if we can even remember those days, that's when the strategic planning process actually started with the District 59 community. And again, that's where the core values and those goals were created. Then throughout the school year of 2020-2021, there was an internal equity audit that began that really started to uncover some of these same issues. Then we determined an outside partner might be really helpful in looking at our system with a fresh lens. And therefore, the board approved an RFP process, a request for proposals, to secure a partner who would actually conduct an equity audit. And that partner that was picked was DM Group, and they are with us this evening. So we had that work that's begun already and is nearing completion. Then we also approved a dual language program review, and we will see the results of that tonight as well. So then the summer of 2021 and into the fall is my timeline for when I joined District 59, we formed an equity coalition. Many of our members you see here tonight. We were able to meet and review and the data, collect that data, engage with our stakeholders, and that's what you'll be seeing the results of. We did the program review for dual language. We also did a third component that is something that is traditionally done in the school district. It hadn't been done since about 2013, so it was very timely, but that's where we use an outside organization to really review our enrollment numbers by school to look at where students are coming from, where they live, and then also looking at the capacity of our facilities and how each of our school facilities are being used in order to handle the enrollment numbers within those schools. And then winter 22, that's where we are right now. So tonight is the presentation of these results, and then we're going to start looking at opportunities to help engage and educate our community. So with that, I am going to switch over because we're going to start with our presentation with District Management Group, and here's where we're going to see how good at technology I am. And we are going to pop up our presentation. Okay, so now hopefully you all can see our PowerPoint. I'm going to play that. Okay. And hopefully you can see our guests who are with us tonight. So my DM group guests, can you all hear us okay?
Yeah.
And everyone can see
you
the
perfectly.
presentation. All
Yeah.
right, so I'm going to see if I can get this actually slid up here. Hold on one second. Yeah, so we're going to be switching pretty frequently. So we're going to see all 4 of us for tonight. And then hopefully when each one speaks, we'll turn it over. And then Dr. Ossel will also be helping present in here as well. Okay, so without further ado, we are going to start with our results from our Equity Opportunity Review, which was facilitated by our partners at District Management Group. And I have to do 2 things at once, so bear with me. Okay, so tonight we're really going to go through 5 different components about the Equity Opportunity Review. What were the project goals? How was that process handled? The methodology that was used? What were the findings and recommendations? And then thinking about next steps. So our introduction and project goals, again, we talked about the RFP process, really what we were looking for. We were looking for a partner who would come in, collect data and review it with us, who would engage across our stakeholder groups for input, and then be able to present out our findings. So that was really why we partnered with DM Group. And with that, I will turn it over to our partners.
Thank you so much. I'm Kristen Cervantes. I am the Vice President of DM Learning at District Management Group. I wanted to just start by saying what an honor it has been to work with you all and get to know you all a little bit through the opportunity review that we've done. Before we dig into specifics, we wanted to introduce ourselves. So we really believe that achieving systemic improvements in public education is going to happen when there's sort of this triangle between focusing on student outcomes, focusing on operational efficiency, and focusing on resource allocation. We were founded in 2004 with the mission to do just that and really find this intersection between management techniques and educational best practices. Go to the next slide, please.
Yes.
We work with a variety of districts around the country, districts of varying sizes, those in urban settings, in rural settings, and suburban settings. Quite the community we have there is quite extensive. You can go to the next slide. Internally, we are separated into three different business units that have a variety of offerings. The DM Learning team does best-in-class professional development where you can get off-the-shelf resources through our District Management Council, which is a membership program. You can do an equity opportunity review. You can participate in community experiences where we bring together districts from around the country to engage in some learning together. And we also publish District Management Journal, which is available on our website if you want to learn more. Which is a journal that shares research and best practices around systemic change for school districts in our country, and we publish that twice a year. Next, we have our DM Solutions team, and this is the team that's thinking about real tangible tools that can help sustain some of that learning that you might have done working with us through the DM Learning team. We have a scheduling software. We also have a performance coaching cycle called the Breakthrough Results that helps see, due to some very focused coaching, increased improvements in short cycles, about 8 to 10 weeks of coaching. And then lastly, we have our consulting team that digs into a variety of custom consulting projects from MTSS implementation to strategic planning to change management. Next slide, please. There are three of us here today to talk to you. As I said, I'm Kristen Cervantes. I'm the Vice President of DM Learning, so I lead the team that I talked about internally. Rachel Klein is here. She is our project manager and has been really in the data and helping prepare the outcomes of everything we've seen here. And then we also have Arendara Flores, who is the equity advisor that has been working with CCSD59 specifically. And with that, I think I'll pass it off to talk about our goals, and then you'll get to hear from Rachel and Arendara a little bit more quite quickly.
Thank you. So I want to bring us back to December of 2020, where our journey started. We came to the Board of Education to talk about diversity, belonging, inclusion, and equity in District 59 and presented an internal audit that looked at opportunity and achievement gaps of our students. With that discussion, that led us to seeking an outside auditor to help with an equity opportunity review. We put out the request for proposals and aligned with district management group due to their value, their visions, their proposal and the scope of their proposal, as well as their clear frameworks and their sustainability efforts that they could offer. So we partnered with DM Group and began our equity opportunity review that next spring, with the goals to find our areas of opportunity to improve upon in areas of equity, to prioritize those areas of inquiry, and to develop long-term plans and sustainable supports for District 59.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Rachel, Project Manager of the DM Equity Office. And I was partnering with the district alongside Kristen and Narendra and Dr. Bresnahan and Dr. Assel to perform the equity audit. And before I hand it over to Dr. Assel to talk about the exact methodology we used with CCSD, I just wanted to take a step back and share a little bit of the context in which this opportunity review sits. So Dr. Bresnahan, next slide, thank you. So you'll see here, we have something called the DM Equity Office approach. And all the way on the right side, this circle piece is what we call our DM Equity Office. We recognize that equity is not a project in the same way that some of our consulting projects is. You can't reach and attain equity in the school district in one go. It's this really ongoing journey that you take, that a district will take. And so our equity office, which is that circle on the right side, is really the partnership that provides the resources and the expertise that allows school districts to continuously work towards these long-term equity goals. That includes an equity advisor. Arandira is one of our equity advisors who come with a lot of expertise, a library of resources like articles and podcasts that are curated to really focus on where districts need support, and then a peer network, a professional learning community that is comprised of other districts who are doing similar equity work. But what we have found is that this cohort of supports is the most effective when districts have a sense of what their strengths and what their areas of opportunity are already. And that's why we also offer something called the Equity Opportunity Review. Others call it an audit. But this is where we really partner with the district to dig deeply into what's happening, what has been the historical trends, and where are some areas to work towards. And so those are the findings that we're going to share today. And then CCSD59 will continue to get the supports that you see on the right side through participation in the Equity Office. And all of this is grounded in our equity framework, what we call the Equity in Action framework. And this is a framework that we developed specifically for equity work in K-12 school districts. And it is comprised of 6 areas, 6 drivers of equity within the domains of teaching and learning and systems and policies. And so now I think Dr. Alsel is going to walk us through specifically what was the methodology we used during the Equity Opportunity Review.
Thank you, Rachel. Our study was a full opportunity review, an analysis that took 5 months to complete. In the first phase, which happened over last summer, we collected and shared various data sets with DM Group, then used a self-reflection tool to review our district practices, and then prioritize those areas of focus. That moved us into phase 2, which is the in-depth analysis, where we continued more in-depth data gathering and sharing in 3 prioritized areas, analysis of that data, and continued planning. This work was completed with a well-rounded team. At the end of the last school year, we asked certified staff and administration to partner as the Equity Coalition, who worked through the self-reflection and analysis phases together. The purpose of bringing the coalition together was to ensure that we had various perspectives, various values, and did not complete our equity opportunity review in a one-sided way that only represented certain perspectives. This allowed us to really diversify the values and the experiences of the people completing the opportunity review. I do want to recognize we have several members of our coalition in the audience this evening and some watching from home. So I want to take a moment and thank them for the hard work that they've put in over the entire summer and fall to make sure that we really took an in-depth study of what we were doing in District 59 and helped us to prioritize those 3 areas. So if you were on the Equity Coalition, would you just stand for a brief moment so we can recognize you? SLT members too. Thank you. Next, I'll share some aspects of each phase of the process. Within our self-reflection phase, we gathered various data points using multiple district staff and our student information systems for district management group. Those data sets included staffing, student enrollment, attendance, discipline, special education, and financial data. Once that was collected, district management group analyzed that data and then presented their findings back to the coalition. One example is shown here, in which we found a difference in scheduling instructional minutes for reading among our elementary schools, and were able to then discuss that difference. After viewing the data, we used a self-reflection tool that district management group provided to further reflect. We gave that to the members of our coalition so that they could independently rate the different areas of the framework. Then I gathered that information and brought it back to the group. In some areas, we were well aligned in our ratings and were able to come to consensus and adopt those. In others, there were discrepancies. So that meeting allowed us time to dialogue and discuss why those discrepancies existed, hear from each other on various perspectives, and then come to consensus on ratings. Those ratings then told us what our most important areas of opportunity were. Those 3 areas were scheduling, enrollment and transportation, and students with disabilities. Next, the coalition met to begin to hypothesize and provide more insights into each of the 3 focus areas. That leads us to phase 2, which is the in-depth analysis. With our focus areas identified, we then provided additional, more detailed data sets to DM group within those 3 areas, and we arranged numerous interviews and focus groups with various stakeholders. There were over 120 stakeholders involved in those groups and interviews, and they included teachers, administrators, educational support personnel, families, and students. Rachel did the interviews and focus groups and brought back the analyzed interview and focus group responses alongside our district data sets. Next, recommendations in each of the identified areas were provided to our district. Each recommendation provided a variety of approaches to decreasing inequities in that specific area. At that time, we were already working towards more equal opportunities in scheduling, and we had further identified dual language programming as an area to focus on from the enrollment and transportation conversations. That summarizes the methodology of the Equity Opportunity Review, and next, Rachel will share our overall findings.
Hi, my name is Erendira Flores, and I am the Equity Advisor for CCSD59. And before we dive into the findings, we first wanted to call out some of the strengths and celebrations that we saw at the district. And that first celebration is that staff is caring and deeply committed to supporting all students. From all levels, school building staff, school leaders, and district leadership, there was gratitude and acknowledgement for one another for the intentional instructional decisions and inclusive classroom practices. And it was evident from all levels that there is a clear investment in the success of every one of their students. And this appreciation for staff was also evident in our conversation with students and families. Students and families shared that they felt that staff was approachable, that they were comfortable with them, and that staff members have been responsive to their needs. The second strength that we noted was the district's positive movement toward the inclusion of students with disabilities in general education setting. We see this through the concerted efforts to have students in self-contained classroom take general education science as part of the greater effort to move to more inclusion opportunities. Third, we noted that transportation is accessible and responsive to family needs, and that overall transportation was a huge area to celebrate. 98% of all eligible students ride the bus to school. And 70% of students across the district or use the district's provided transportation. And one full-time employee is dedicated to district-wide transportation services. And this is unique among school districts nationally. And families across focus groups really noted that the transportation team was really responsive to their needs. One family specifically noted her appreciation for how the district worked efficiently to ensure that her children were on the same bus after a policy initially had them assigned to separate buses. And lastly, a celebration is that the district is well resourced. Across focus groups, teachers and district leaders shared that they have all of the materials they need to support instructional excellence. And moreover, that they were also using resources to provide extracurricular opportunities for their students, whether this was band scholarships for instruments, waiving of after-school activity fees, or staggering afternoon bus times to increase access to extracurricular activities and opportunities for all students. And so when we move to findings, you'll note that we had a finding for each of the areas where there was a focus. We had a finding in the dual language programming, in scheduling and how to use them more strategically. Third is working with students with disabilities as the district is moving to more inclusion efforts. And then we found a bonus finding, moreover, where there was a real opportunity for communication to be improved with stakeholders and families. And so with the first finding, I'll try that one more time. Wonderful. So before I read the first finding, I want to be clear that CCSD59 has 3 dual language programs. There's a one-way Polish, a one-way Spanish, and a two-way Spanish. And this finding is focused on the one-way Spanish language programming. And the finding was that the effort to equally distribute Spanish one-way dual language programming to all schools has led to inequitable opportunities for students and staff. And when we pulled back, we noticed that while there was a well-intended effort to equally distribute programming across schools, this has led to inequitable opportunities for both students and staff, and it's led to inequitable opportunities and outcomes for students, has created challenging work conditions for staff teaching in the one-way Spanish program, and has put a strain on the district's limited bilingual staff resources. And Dr. Asel is going to speak more on some of the more data that we found.
Actually, I am going to take this one. Thank you so much, Arindera. When DM Group really started to look at our data, this was one of their findings that they presented to us. So we looked specifically at our spring 2019 Iar scores. Obviously, spring 2020, we didn't have that data. And so looking at the last, kind of fairly equalized level of data, again, this is one measurement, but it's a measurement that we need to look on. And one of the things that really gave our team the opportunity to ask some more questions. So when we're looking here at those IAR scores and disaggregating it by those programs, you can see the pretty wide discrepancies in performance across both math and ELA. So starting from the left, most discrepant is our one-way Spanish classrooms, then our two-way Spanish classrooms, and then looking over at all at actually positive and increased growth and our one-way Polish. And then you can see across our monolingual programs where our monolingual gen ed students fell in terms of IAR. So this again gave us pause and is allowing us the opportunity to ask some questions and look further at additional data to really see where those discrepancies come from. Additionally, we looked at the focus groups, which I think were very insightful, just to be able to sit and have our partners meet with our staff and look at some of the trends. And so we found across the board in this review that we know we have challenges when it comes to attracting and retaining our bilingual staff. We have higher turnover, as you can see here in the chart, across even our tenure in years. We have a pretty strong discrepancy between our bilingual and our monolingual teachers. We also know that that is affecting their level of professional development and learning, which we know are very unique learning settings and actually require oftentimes a deeper level of understanding across not only English, but also across the second language. And so being able to look at those pieces of data that were reflected in the focus groups really aligned to what we were seeing in the analysis of our teacher data as well. Then one of the other findings, which I think we already had an awareness of, but really put under the spotlight, was how we utilize our multi-age classrooms and how really we use them most heavily in our one-way dual language programs, and how that has led to even more challenging environments for our bilingual teachers to work through. And again, that came out as well in our focus group data and interview data, really looking at smaller numbers of students spread out more broadly across the district and not being able to maximize those resources in order to create a single grade level within a classroom. And a lot of the issues that have arisen because of that, because they truly are teaching 2 grade levels simultaneously. So not only 2 languages, but 2 grade levels and additional curriculum. And then this piece is also really important because we looked across our TDP program, our talent development program, and looked at across the various demographics of how do our students have opportunities to access these programs and higher level classes. And we, as you can see here, we average 11% across our monolingual who have access and participation in our TDP program. You can see the lowest percentage here is when we look at our one-way Spanish. And then in our two-way Spanish, we have about 4%, and one-way Polish is actually higher at 5%. And then I believe in, Dr. Ossel, correct me if I'm wrong, or our team over here, but in our sub-separate programs, are those our inclusion programs?
Those are our special education
Special
programs.
education. Okay, thank you. So you can see here, we're focused here on the dual language piece, but you can see we have 2 areas that we need to dig further into, ask some questions. And again, if we're talking about access to those apples, this is a good piece of evidence that tells us that we are not providing that equitable access. And now I will turn it back to our DM team.
So through our focus groups, we found that in addition to the impact of the dual language program on students, teachers report feeling overworked and underappreciated. In schools with only 1 or 2 dual language section, bilingual teachers spoke of limited opportunities for collaboration, leading to a feeling of isolation and a lack of sense of belonging. Also, with a lack of bilingual representation and leadership, dual language staff felt like they needed to advocate more strongly for their needs. And bilingual teachers are often asked to translate for office staff or monolingual teachers when working with Spanish-speaking families. And this bilingual teachers were shared that they often felt like they needed to take on this extra role of acting as an advocate for families who only speak Spanish and feeling unsupported as they take on a wide range of responsibilities. Additionally, with limited collaboration, bilingual teachers are planning for multiple languages and at times multiple grades. And the combination of unique challenges faced by bilingual teachers has led to a greater turnover among this population. And this high attrition rate are concerning, especially coupled with existing challenges of finding enough qualified bilingual staff. And on our next slide, we noticed that, so while the intention of equally dispersing the dual language programs across the district was well intended, it had inadvertently also put a strain on the limited bilingual staff resources. So equal distribution was an attempt to reduce busing, but data shows that most students use the bus to get to school. And with dual language programs dispersed across a district, it's not able to benefit from economies of scale. So staffing such as intervention support, special education services, and family engagement at times are splitting their times between buildings. And due to the district's challenge in finding bilingual staff, the staffing often doesn't match the student demand at each school, and bilingual staff may need to be shared or buildings have to do without some resources, impacting opportunities for student program. Additionally, from a student experience, one thing that was noted that when there's one or two cohorts of dual language programs, the student experience is that they only have experience with those same students across multiple years and at times with the same teacher or staffing. And so for our recommendations, some of the recommendations to consider are to rezone attendance boundaries, reposition programs across the district, and or redesign the programs as you consider the inequitable outcomes of students. Additionally, the district has worked to gather enrollment demographic study and a dual language audit to further inform these next steps and to provide more depth analysis on some of these recommendations and considerations. Our second finding is around schedules. And the finding here is that until recently, school leaders developed schedules as operational tools rather than strategic tools. And schedules prioritize key constraints like special education schedules, union policies, and state guidelines. And this also, we found that there was a difference between the elementary scheduling and the junior high. And at the elementary level, the findings demonstrated that there was more scheduling guidance provided that is aligned to instructional promising practices, and stronger accountability would create stronger alignment of these promising practices. As we're in the junior high level, until recently, there's been limited guidance and development on strategic design of these schedules. And so this is our elementary scheduling promising practice framework based on extensive research and practice that outlines 6 promising practices that remove barriers to learning. And for this review, we focused on 3 of the promising practices: consistent allocation of time, daily intervention and enrichment, and daily common planning time and opportunities. And I'll pass it over to CCSD59.
Thank you so much. So when we look at that consistent allocation of time as a promising practice, this was one of the first data sets that DM Group actually presented to our Equity Coalition. And I think we all sat back and really were amazed at the differences that we saw when we really thought most of our elementary schools were in alignment. And what we see here is that there's a difference of 15 minutes per day per school in one of our content areas that actually leads to amount of 45 hours over a school year. So really taking, again, this is causing us to engage in some of this work to look more deeply about what our scheduling practices are, how we schedule, and how we can get better alignment and consistency amongst our schools. And then when we look at the daily intervention and enrichment piece, this is something that also really stood out to us because we were able to offer a WIN opportunity in grades 3 through 5. WIN stands for what I need, which really is that opportunities for interventions and differentiation for our students. Again, when we talk about equity, we're talking about getting students the resources that they need based on their individual needs. So we're able to achieve that in grades 3 through 5, but unfortunately we don't have that time built into our schedules in K through 2. And so we're really looking across all of our schedules as to how can we really maximize that time to allow for interventions to occur, as well as differentiation for our students. Then we talk about the potential benefits of common planning time. This is something that we've actually talked with the board about previously. We talked about it in context of our PE. So those things go hand in hand, because as our students are engaged in our fine arts programs and our physical education, that is what allows our classroom teachers to have that collaboration time. And we know that as educators that that time is absolutely invaluable. We do not have built-in structures very often for teachers to have that time to collaborate, but we know the benefits of having teachers work together as teams. And so not only do we understand that we don't have enough common plan time across grade levels, but we also began to really see the impact it was having across our different programs. So our dual language teachers having opportunity to collaborate amongst themselves, but also with their grade level counterparts, as well as this really flowed into special education as well. And those opportunities to understand not only their own programs, but to gain a better understanding across the board of each other, because we really are very interdependent within our school structures. And so looking at opportunities for PLCs, which is just an acronym for Professional Learning Communities, time for teachers to engage in review of data and really look at our students and instructional practices and improve those and learn from each other. And so wanting to have that time and that consistent protected time for our teachers is something that we really want to take a deeper look at through scheduling.
So for shifting from elementary now to the junior high scheduling, is the promising practices here are really embedded in having very clear goals and priorities that are named, including clear district expectations around time, courses, and staffing. And through our focus group and interviews, we noted that teachers and staff shared that schedules prioritize the most limited courses, created and were created to meet needs of staff availability and contracts prior to slotting the students. And at the time of the review, school leaders reported that district guidance was either limited and or had too many expectations to reasonably follow. And so we did find a wide range of experiences at the junior high level. And so the recommendations, the shared recommendations for the scheduling finding on the next slide, is to set clear district-wide priorities, to provide that professional learning, to really strengthen the process and the roles for how to develop a strong schedule, and finally to strengthen accountability and support mechanisms. And here Dr. Oswald is going to talk about ASEL. ASEL is going to talk about the current work that they've been doing with this scheduling finding.
Actually, Dr. Bresnahan again.
Yeah, I'm going to take that one too, if you don't mind. So that was a great segue into really looking at our junior high schedules. And I have to say, we knew even when we began this, before we began this equity audit, that was an area that we really wanted to work on this year. I think it was one of the first things that I learned about coming into the district that we knew was going to be an opportunity to create greater consistency and really look at it from a student need point of view, because we have 3 very different schedules across our 3 junior highs. And so we wanted to really engage in that work. And I'm very proud to say that we have a junior high scheduling committee that has been meeting and under the leadership of Dr. Ossel and Ms. Savage to really engage in best practices that we've learned through DM Group, but also engage all of our junior high staff to get feedback. How can we create a schedule that creates greater equity, that really targets the areas of need for our students, and then understanding too that it's not just about changing the schedule, it's also about changing the way we teach based on that schedule, which is why that professional learning component is really important and has to go hand in hand. And so schedule changes don't just happen overnight. We want it to be mindful and thoughtful and intentional with that work. and we've really appreciated the opportunity to have DM groups support in navigating some of those best practices.
Our third finding here was around students with disabilities. And here is the third finding, is that efforts to increase inclusion of students with disabilities in general education settings are complicated by the culture and systems that limit staff collaboration. And so with the concerted efforts to increase inclusion, we found that the culture of division is fueled by lack of knowledge, really of each other's role. The general education teacher not understanding special education teacher role, and vice versa. And truly a fear of failure. And secondly, the siloed culture is reinforced by structures that discourage collaboration. And so I'll hand it over to our district leaders for the data.
Thank you. I'm excited to have Dr. Elizabeth Degree here with us this evening. Dr. Degree is our Executive Director of Educational Services and was a member of our Equity Coalition. She has been instrumental in leading database decision-making for Ed Services over the last 3 years and will walk us through some of our data tonight.
Thank you. All right, so this first slide that we have illustrates the achievement of students with IEPs on the IAR, and you can see the difference between the achievement of students with disabilities and students without disabilities. Even within the group of students with disabilities, you can see that there is a difference between those who spend more time in inclusive settings and those who spend more time in segregated settings. This is a finding in District 59, and it is consistent with what the research bears out in terms of where students spend their time. In addition, this just shows the academic differences, but there are also differences that play out in terms of communication and socialization and adult living outcomes when students spend more of their time in more inclusive settings.
Moving into some of our focus group trends, we had several focus groups for families of students with IEPs and with our special education staff. Our families expressed through the focus groups an overarching theme that inclusion of students with disabilities in the general education setting benefits both the student with the IEP and the students without IEPs, socially and academically. The staff focus groups echoed this belief in inclusive settings. Staff also expressed that inclusion would strengthen staff skill set, a growth mindset, opportunities for access to various programming, and a sense of belonging in the school community.
All right, so on the left here, you can see some of the findings that came from the focus groups that were conducted with staff. And it shows some of the work that we've engaged in over the last 3 years to really review student data and identify individual inclusion opportunities. And that's really about looking at that database decision making and identifying individual needs of students. It reflects a shift that we're beginning to make in the way that we talk about students and how and where their services are provided. I also want to touch on the last bullet, the addition of the role of inclusion facilitators. This position really, it was shifted from some other staffing, and these individuals helped to design support plans for students that include building the capacity of general and special education teachers to meet students' needs in general education settings, as well as identifying lagging skills that students might have and skills that they need to learn to be more successful in the general education setting. On the right, these bars reflect information that is reported each year on our Illinois School Report Card. This divides, as you can see, the students in the blue, where we have labeled self-contained, students who spend less than 40% of their day in general education settings, and those in the red bar who are in inclusive settings for that percentage, for more than 40% of their day. So what this shows is that we've had some growth over the last 3 years in terms of moving to more inclusive environments for our students with disabilities. I'd also like to share one other piece that didn't come out of this review, but this work is beginning at the Early Learning Center. They divide their environments a little bit differently, but we have a regular education program and a special separate program. They all operate in the same building, but they're coded differently. And in 2017, 47% of our preschool students were served in special education classes, which are pretty segregated classrooms. In 2020, that number was down to 39.4%. So there's been a big shift at the Early Learning Center. This is really important because it sets the stage for what adults think kids can do as they move forward. And I really wanted to credit Ms. Ramsey and Ms. Ward and their team at the ELC for thinking more broadly about what kids can do.
Thank you. Moving back into focus group trends, we also noted in the focus groups that there was an expressed divide between general educators and special educators, with some feeling that they are not fully accepted in their school community. There was also a divide for parents of students with disabilities within their broader school community. Mindset seemed to be a recurring sentiment from school staff and focus groups, more specifically, a fear of failure that staff would be able to appropriately serve all students. And finally, a lack of understanding of roles that all educators play in educating children with IEPs. Some of the individual statements that surfaced in groups and interviews also expressed how structures can separate special education and general education when both really contain very strong instructional practices. And how we purposefully utilize plan time that we have for collaboration and for a team approach to educating students with disabilities, and ensuring professional development is appropriately provided to all members of the IEP team, including general educators. So the student achievement data that we've shown paired with the stakeholder feedback demonstrated a continued need for district-wide improvement in the area of special education. And now I'll hand it back to DM Group.
And so our recommendations and considerations to have for this third finding around special education is to build in structures to encourage collaboration for all staff members who are servicing students. Secondly, is to clarify roles, responsibilities, and expectations, and really to ensure that schedules and structures really set staff up for success. And lastly is to foster a culture of risk-taking. In the focus groups, they really weren't sure whether it was their role or their job, or this fear of trying something in fear that it wouldn't work and then be blamed. And so really think through what does it mean to create intentional and structured opportunities for staff to solve and experiment together in the spirit of innovation for our students, for your students. And lastly, for our fourth finding is, which was our bonus finding, was that most district and school-based communications are one way, limiting opportunities for genuine collaboration with families. And I'll hand it over to district leadership.
All right, thank you. I promise we're rounding it out. We are getting close to the end. This is the final kind of bonus finding that DM Group put forth for us. And I am very proud to say that I believe this is in direct alignment with our work of our strategic plan. So I think the things that we have found in this equity review are also the things that we have acknowledged as part of our strategic plan and are really intentionally working around. And it is that shift from one-way communication to two-way communication and how we engage our families, parents, students, community members as partners rather than just receivers of information. So these were some of the findings that DM Group had put forth for us that we are going to work to really embed as part of our strategic plan work, and looking at what came out of our focus group data, again, focusing on our district-wide communication, increasing our amount of opportunities for feedback, how we really increase our school-based communication, because that's truly where families want to hear from, It highlighted the work of our community outreach specialists, which we know are so valuable, and opportunities for more of them perhaps in the future so that we can expand those opportunities. And then really getting that structured and proactive feedback, which truly will lead us to have voice and partnership with our families. So again, looking here at how do we create a purpose for our families to see them and what is their role and what is our role as community partners, getting those structures for that two-way communication. And then what we all known, and I know the board has really reiterated this, is how do we increase that accessibility? So how do we look at different modalities? How do we look at barriers through language or accessibility and other ways to improve our communication? So now I believe in looking at next steps, we want to we've talked about our scheduling, and that work is already underway. And then the first one, really looking at our dual language programming, which is going to come up next in the next report as we dig a little bit deeper. You also had the opportunity 2 weeks ago to hear from our multilingual director, Joshua Perdomo, and he's got his support team here now with our audience of dual language teachers with us tonight, because that definitely, these two areas really rose to the forefront of work that we knew we could engage in now because of their urgency. Now, that is not to discount these two other areas, because the work around our students with disabilities, you already heard from our team for special services. We are already focused in on a lot of that work. What I believe we need to do a better job in is communicating that work with the board and our community, as well as engaging with our staff for professional learning opportunities, so that all this important work towards inclusivity is broadly known, understood, and embraced. And then that communications piece, as I said, that's already embedded within our strategic plan work. So one of the things that DM Group shared with us, which is really their change protocol based on very research-based work, to look at where we are on this whole continuum of engaging stakeholders. And we are right here at step one, and that is our purpose for tonight, is we are really creating a sense of urgency around the data that has been shown to you. Hopefully some of the things stood out to you, and you jotted some notes I saw, and they struck a chord with you. Our audience members, are those listening at home, there's probably a few pieces of data that really struck a chord, and that is going to compel you to have a sense of urgency around what can we do next. And then we're going to work our way around this wheel, because this is long and challenging work that we are going to engage in, but we have partners that are going to help us do it. We have access to them. We have access to a lot of resources and a professional learning community of other districts that have gone before us, and those that are still engaging in this work, and others who are reaching out to find out how to even start in this work, because we're actually one step ahead. And so that is in a nutshell, I think, the work of the last 6 months or so, engaging with DM Group and this equity opportunity review. And we are just over an hour right now. So I'm going to ask the board, would you like to go ahead and go straight into clarifying questions while we have DM Group on the line with us? Would you like to take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll go back in and do questions then? Which would you prefer?
You want to move on to it? I think going with clarifying questions wouldn't be a bad thing right now.
All right, they want to plow through. So we're going to keep our 3 guests on the line, and this is the opportunity, board members, for any clarifying questions that you may have regarding any of the data that was presented for this portion of the presentation tonight.
So remember, speak loudly and into the mic so everyone can properly hear you. And I would also say, since we are Zooming this, to maybe introduce yourself before speaking.
So this is Robert Mancia. Just to clarify, clarifying questions only. We're saving the discussion of what we heard to the later portion of the presentation. All right.
So this is Courtney Lang, board member. I had a clarifying question, and maybe I'll start with district administration on this one. So when you went through the process of the audit, where you eventually narrowed to, okay, we're focusing on these sort of 3 areas, right? The scheduling, the students with disabilities. I'm wondering, you talked about a conversation where, internal conversations where there was a lot of alignment on certain points so we could move forward on these pieces. I'm wondering if you could gap fill for us a little bit of what happened there, and then, before we move into these details.
Sure. So earlier in the presentation, you saw the DM Group's equity framework, which included 3 components that were teaching and learning focused and 3 components that were systems and policy focused. So our rating scales were aligned to those 6 areas. So our coalition answered questions and rated our district's ability on a continuum, like a Likert scale rating, for each of those 6 areas. And from those 6, some of them we agreed highly on and adopted, and some we didn't, so we had more discussion on. By the end of that, we had identified those 3 areas: scheduling, enrollment and transportation, and students with disabilities, as the highest priority for us to look further into, find more data on, and discuss at a higher level.
Thanks. So just to clarify that, for those items that weren't as high priorities as those 3, I'm just wondering if there was any decisions made with those, or if we're sort of maintaining that as a stage 2, or if those are sort of out of the purview.
So I wouldn't say they're out of the purview, because all of these components work together and strengthen each other. And so a lot of them need to happen continuously and alongside each other. So none are out of the purview. The 3 that we identified were the ones that we knew we had a sense of urgency about, that we needed to look into next and prioritize in our next level study of the data.
I have a question. This is Robert Mancia. So the 3 initial focus items, were those just, maybe I missed it, developed independently of with DMG, or did DMG help you guys get there? Were those?
They definitely helped us get there.
Okay.
So the role of district management group in this was to take in all of our district data and to analyze and then pull out components that they saw were very important in terms of both celebrations and areas and opportunities for improvement. And as they work with districts across the nation, they have a wealth of information, resources, experience, and research in these areas. And so they're able to provide for us an outside view of where we may have large discrepancies, big needs, and big opportunities for improvement, and where we are making some really great substantial progress. So I think they both showed us our data in a new light that allowed us to see it differently in comparison with all their knowledge and research, and then also helped us with the process that prompted the discussion that resulted in the identification of areas.
I'm going to kind of jump onto special education. So, Kate, you may need to come up, Miss Elizabeth. It's more when you would talk about the inclusive of education. Is that by grade level, or is that by ability level, or can we kind of go more and discuss more about what the inclusive special education kind of really is?
Yes.
Which, from my understanding, it could be ability-based or grade-based.
Sure. So when we talk about inclusion of students with disabilities, what we're really talking about is the extent to which they participate in the general education setting, in the general education curriculum, and with their general education peers. So that's really what inclusion is about. We determine that on a student-by-student basis according to what their needs are, and then determining the goals that their needs require, then determining the services, and then we look at where might those services be provided. So when we look at the numbers that you saw, those really represent K to 8 for us. When we looked at those bar graphs, those are really the K-8 numbers. That's why I mentioned the early childhood ones separately, but that they're not divided out by grade.
Okay. So kind of as a follow-up, so when they're in their special education classes or with their groups, are they divided up by grades? Or they kind of, because my question kind of goes back to, this time with special education teachers spending with grade level teachers and stuff like that, and planning time. And it's hard if you can, you want the days to be consistent. So do you line up with a third grade teacher or the fourth grade based on the ability level. So I'm kind of trying to envision that, which I know we don't have a solution for, but that's a concern of mine, is basically what I want to say, and something that I'd like to see addressed and figured out.
Certainly. So let's think about elementary. Sixth grade levels, we do not have 6 special ed teachers at any of our elementary buildings. We don't need 6 special ed teachers at any of our elementary buildings. But what that means is that their schedules don't line up with every grade level. We try to divide teachers kind of by grade level. So you might have one teacher who has K2, the other one has 3-5. And then sometimes they have plan time together and sometimes they don't. So as we look at scheduling moving forward, we hope to be able to address that so that we have more opportunities for collaboration.
Yeah, this is Joe Sager, board member. So while we're on special education, they identified this issue of, with the dual language being placed at every school, we've sort of spread things thin. And then we're placing, or we have students who are special ed who are participating in general ed classes. They're spread throughout all the buildings as well. Do we have a similar issue with staff for special ed where those staff members are spread throughout the district as well?
We do, but it is a little different. So civil rights wise, we need to be able to serve students to the extent that we can in their neighborhood schools. That's a real obligation for us in special ed. That said, we really do look at our, together with HR, look at our staffing to make sure that it matches up with the number of students, the intensity of needs from building to building. So those kind of staffing adjustments are made even during the course of the year. We have added staff. Special ed, like dual language, does have a pretty serious staffing shortage issues in our state and nationally right now.
And with those staffing shortage issues, is that something that we're seeing in the district that's affecting our special education programs, or are we in good shape?
We right now are seeing some staffing shortages relative to related service providers, not so much with teachers. But the shortages are out there, so we're continuing to recruit and plan and partner with organizations that can assist us in staffing.
I have another question. This is Robert Mancia. There was a graph provided regarding TDP, Talent Development Program, for the advanced coursework. 2 questions. One, is the screening for eligibility for TDP, is that in English only? And 2, at a very high level, what are the qualifications for students to participate in TDP?
All right, so we are right now currently we are looking at multiple data sources, and last year we actually changed some of our screening criteria. We are using data from the COGAT's assessment. We are also looking at our performance data, student achievement data. In addition, last year we began looking at we began implementing the HOPE scale, which is a different scale where we're gathering information from staff on student eligibility criteria that would be very valuable for them to be looking at in terms of determining placement for talent and development program. So we have multiple ways of looking at it. We're continuing to assess our criteria, our entrance criteria, and look at our norms to make sure that we're appropriate in that. So it's an ongoing process, but there is, right now we're looking at, those tests would be in English, to my knowledge right now.
Okay.
Patty Petrielli, does that mean that our numbers in TDP are increasing for more children to have that opportunity, or is that keeping it at more of a pure?
It could actually potentially increase the numbers, but what we're seeing is looking at ways to look at all demographic groups and find opportunities to make sure that we might be increasing the numbers in certain demographic populations that may not have been identified before.
Is there like a possibility of if like dual language students do not have the opportunity to test in the regular classes, if we couldn't like do a like pre-screening for children that are dual that maybe their teachers would be able to tell if those kids could go into like those TDP programs with their own type of screening.
Yeah.
Because I think we
So-
missed some of those students in that.
Before Susan answers, that's a solution, and
Oh,
we're gonna
sorry.
put a pin in that one. I promised Randy I would be very good at keeping us on point. So I love it, and those are suggestions. But what the data tells us is we have to look at all of those things. How we screen, what language barriers are there that occur? Are there marginalized groups that are not adequately represented, who we need to look at our screening process in order to determine what those needs are? Dr.
So
Sager?
on TDP, completely clarifying question. Do we have bilingual TDP instructors? Or is our TDP program English only?
Currently English.
Okay, thank you.
Good question.
This is Randy. I have a question. I want to go to the junior high scheduling. One of the things we talked about that's a challenge was the meeting staff availability. Was the kind of the comment. Can I get that explained to me? I mean, are we, like, for an example, we teach French at, a junior high. And, if so many kids sign up, there's only so many kids we can put in the program kind of thing. Is that kind of it? Or what is really meant by meeting staff availability? And I don't know who that would be meant for.
I think it really goes across multiple things, like content areas. For example, if we were looking at number of students that qualify for an advanced math course, qualifications of teachers, the teachers' schedules versus student enrollment, all of those factors going into the scheduling to allow for students to take the coursework that they are most, that they want or that they need.
So for clarification, so it's basically having the staff available to teach the number of students that may have signed up for the program or that are qualified for the program or have the
Correct. I
qualifications
think
to
it's,
teach it.
yes, correct. All of those things are limitations that go into our scheduling.
So this is Courtney Lang, board member. I have a question related to the dual language, which we've defined for the purposes of this study as the one-way Spanish, and trying to understand the number as well as the breadth of professional development opportunities that we've given to that staff that relate directly to, and I think this does get into the dual audit, but things like language acquisition, questions of that phonics in some of these specific areas, like in the second language as opposed to in English. So I'm just wondering sort of what our baseline is right now with dual language professional development opportunities.
So for our professional development, over the years, we've had a wide variety of trainings, starting with the Biliteracy Institute, which has trained staff historically. However, as the years have gone on, we've often had building level training, we've had summer training that has been in conjunction with other members of the instruction department for different reasons. Every year we have new teacher dual language academy that includes these strategies. We will talk a little bit about professional learning in our dual language audit, so you can hear a little bit more about that as well. Some findings that we saw through classroom observations, as well as findings through teacher reported feelings around professional learning. So we're seeing a lot of similarities there, so we can share a little bit more then. But we have a process, we have professional learning, but we definitely have room to grow in that area currently.
I appreciate it. And I guess just a clarifying question similar for Mr. Vittore, like related to this, is I know one of the things we identified in here is the retention issues that we have with our dual language teachers, and different facets of that were identified. And I know you were on this group that was part of the audit, but I'm just wondering if you have any other insights from an HR perspective to layer onto that.
I would add that we do our standard exit surveys and outboarding, but it does get complex while our program has grown as quickly as it has. So in the last few years with rolling up programming, whether that's to the junior high or for the dual language Polish, the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, we've hired between 6 to 12 teachers a year to fill new or open positions. But with the items that DM Group has pointed out, it can be extra challenging if you're the only teacher at your grade level, or you're working in a class that has up to grade levels. So it makes us less competitive to other districts where the programming might be more aligned.
I would also add, having had the opportunity to meet with our dual language teachers recently, and that was absolutely an area of concern. I think we really have to look at root causes across all of this. And I think culture, climate, all of those things, access to consistent resources, the number of times they are moved across buildings, across programs, across grade levels, all of those learning conditions that really, I think, tax on the system to create that, where we saw in the focus groups that feeling of being burnt out or being, overworked. And these are highly marketable staff with high qualifications that are very marketable across many school districts. And so if conditions are not such that really are conducive to the retention, it is very easy to find work elsewhere. And I think all of those things are deeper dives that we have to take in the system to ensure that not only for our dual language teachers, but for all of our staff, that we have conditions and environments that promote retention and workplace satisfaction.
I appreciate that, and I see it in some ways analogous to the conversations we've been having recently about the shortage of substitutes and how do we systemically make District 59 a place that's attractive. And I think in the same way, we want to think strategically about that. So thank you both.
So while we're on dual language, can you just give us a brief overview of special education in dual language? Do we have specialists who are bilingual to work with our dual language students in special education?
Not a lot. So we do have a few, so at the Early Learning Center, that's probably where we have the best supports. We have bilingual special ed. So our teachers at the Early Learning Center are certified bilingual, special ed, and early childhood. So they are really, highly qualified group. That's probably where we have the best supports and services. We also have bilingual speech pathologists, social workers at that building. We do not have enough bilingual special ed teachers for all of our buildings who have dual programs to have bilingual staff. We have some speech pathologists who kind of float to do evaluations who are bilingual. And those individuals also provide services to some students. Other students we have a bilingual SLP assistant, as well as an interpreter who works and has worked with our speech language pathologists for many years. In terms of special ed teachers, there, as I said, are just a handful across the whole district. The majority of our students who are in dual programming get special ed services in English.
And I will say that extends even into our MTSS process, even prior to and outside of special education. When the DM group talked about that economy of scale and our resources being spread out further. So again, a lot of these things, interventions and those in translation services fall on our dual language teachers, which again, is not equitable as compared to our monolingual. That need for those who are bilingual is pretty dire.
And just for clarity, can you explain the difference between special ed and MTSS? So MTSS is a temporary.
Right. So MTSS is a very fluid process that identifies individual needs of students and can move them through different tiers where they get individualized supports with the hope of then bringing them back into the gen ed setting so that they can, have access to the curriculum through the universal classroom. But, it's based on individual needs. It's based on moments in time. And then if, special ed is an actual designation outside of that process. But those supports, so I guess what I'm trying to emphasize is the layers of support that all students receive, both in special education and everywhere in between. We do not have all of those resources in all languages to support all students. And that creates a strain on the system for us to ensure that all students are getting what they need. Again, we're giving everyone apples, and maybe not everyone needs apples. And we keep giving them apples because apples is all we got.
I kind of want to go back to the Equity Coalition. Our Equity Coalition has 8 members, and or 12 members, 8 from the district administrative office and 4 from the schools. Now I'm going to ask this kind of a question for DM group. Is that a common allocation of resources within an equity coalition, or is that kind of unique? I'll let someone from DM answer that one.
Kristen or Rachel, do either of you want to grab that question? Can you hear us okay?
Sure, I can take that one. So yes, I would say that is pretty typical. What we do is we work with district leaders, and as we did with Dr. Bresnahan and Dr. Assel, to discuss who should be on it. We want a range of knowledge in the district. I think it's often helpful from the district level as we're looking at systems here to make sure that we have those with a wide range of knowledge across departments in the district. But we also want to include those at the school level, of course, to be able to see the different perspectives. When it comes to the logistics of getting a group together multiple times, it can be really hard to actually get those at the school level to participate. And so in this case, we sometimes will see even fewer people from the school level on these coalitions, just because logistically it's quite challenging. So we were actually pretty pleased to see that a third of those were from the school perspective, and we think that really added some value to the coalition.
So then, as an observation, this equity coalition will still be part of the whole process going forward, correct?
So the coalition was formed for the equity opportunity review and has served its purpose in that. I believe in our ongoing efforts and long-term planning, we will regularly call upon this team for more discussion and decision making and supporting, the knowledge of different perspectives in our decisions.
Okay, so then I would ask this question. Since we've identified dual language as being one of our key items of, findings, I don't see any dual language representation on the Equity Coalition.
So the opportunity to review process was to help us, if you remember those 3 goals, identify the areas and prioritize them, and then create long-term plans. So those long-term plans, depending on what area they're in, will be where we need to call upon lots more voices, and there will be lots more discussion, decision-making, and processes within them. So right now, we're just at that very first step of that change framework. We're just gathering the data and getting our priorities in order and starting that long-term plan. I believe we will reach out to many, many more people depending on the topic and the solutions that we begin to talk about in our next sessions.
I think a good example of that, Randy, is how we pulled together like the junior high scheduling team, the committee. So that was identified through the work of the Equity Coalition, but the actual work of building a plan and a solution really fell on a much broader group because now we're actually into that action planning phase. So absolutely, each of these prioritized areas, we are calling on different groups of people because this is just the tip, right, of that iceberg, and how do we really dig into what's beneath? And we have to have the voices, some of who you see in this room, to really give context and more meaning so that we can actually lead to solutions and problem solving. And I think actually that was one of the things that we really recognized as a district team was we don't even want to start diving into solutions until we have the right voices in the room in order to do that. And I think we worked really well with DM Group to actually communicate that and put the solution piece on pause until we had the opportunity to educate and engage.
Could I just add that when we started the process, our director of multilingual programs was part of the process, but she left in the middle of it, and we felt it was unfair to ask Joshua to join the group 3/4 of the way through. So there was representation through part of the process.
This is Mardell Schumacher. it's difficult for me to assess everything that we are being told tonight because it's so broad. There is so much information. I've been on the board a long time, and one of the best parts of being on the board is our district has always been at the top when it comes to almost everything. We've always been ahead of the state. Our scores have always been great, and it bothers me to think that we are now trying to fix what has evidently going down. And I don't know how we can do it if we take all of these individual things at the same time. We're going to have to work on them one at a time, I think, to get them done, unless there is a commonality among the different things. But it's great to find out that we're good at this, but not good at that. But then we have to work at one of these. We can't solve every one of these problems at the same time because they're all in different departments. So I'm not sure I understand exactly where we're going at this point.
So Mardell, that is a great point. And I think that sense of a little bit of overwhelming, looking at all of these facets, but that's exactly what this led us to, is by looking at the bigger picture, we were actually able to draw the commonalities across. So while we started explicitly looking at transportation, one of the things we realized is it wasn't that transportation was the issue, it was how we programmed that drove transportation. And so we need to look at our programming and where we place students. And as we looked at enrollment and boundaries and where students were going, we realized, well, that's a result of our programming and how we're placing programs. So we've been able to see, and we're only a third of the presentation way through the 3 reports tonight. So I hope by the time you leave tonight, Mardell, that we will have created that context that will tie this together so that you can see, okay, what are those underlying root issues that we really can address that will actually move all of these things one step forward.
And I think that's great because I think we all realize that to solve a problem, we're going to have to work one thing at a time and then see how it works, what the success rate is.
Absolutely. And so we don't want to do anything short-sighted. And by solving one thing, like we could say, let's just hire more dual language teachers. Let's just hire more special ed teachers. Would that be the long-term solution, or are there other deeply rooted things that we need to look at before we come up with what that solution is? So our hope is we're going to sit with these issues for a while, let them stir and simmer, and we'll start drawing those connections and getting more voices and data that cause us to look deeper. That is it identification for our TDP program? Is it something else? We don't have the answer to that, so we cannot apply a fix until we really know what the problem is.
I have one. Oh, go ahead, Marty.
One of the things that somebody said to me was that we need to assess our programs and the students on an ongoing basis to determine if what they are doing is working for each student. And I think that's probably one thing that's common to all of the programs.
That has absolutely, I think this process has made a very fine point on that, Mardell.
And then
that we
it's
need to have
also-
things that we are measuring regularly so that we don't end up in this situation again.
And for the English language learner program, I was told the English language learner program must be rigorous and it must have a structured curriculum. And I think curriculum is one of the things that probably we have to work at pretty much all over. I won't say any more now.
I have one final clarification question. This is Robert Mencia again. 85% of multi-age classrooms are one-way dual. How many classrooms are we talking about? Roughly, ballpark. 7? 7? Okay.
85% of
There-
what?
Of multi-age classrooms. So there's 7.
And then would be one
Yeah. 7 one-way dual and then 1.
general.
Okay.
There are a total of 11 multi-age classes. 8 of them are dual one-way, 3 of them are mono.
Mm.
So that impacts 11 teachers and 11 sections, and impacts about 200 students.
Okay.
One of the things over the time that I've been in the district that I have seen where we have had multi-age classes, and it's not something that we have had a lot of, but the one place I've seen that is in the English language learner classrooms that were in each of the different elementary schools. We didn't have all of one group in one school. We had a room with multi-age class people working in that room, and the teacher actually spoke to all of the groups, all of the age groups, in English while they were learning English, and they were Spanish students. So, and that worked very well in the school that I went into. In fact, it was one of my favorite places to go and visit because the teacher was so fantastic. It wasn't a huge class, but it was multi-age, definitely.
So can I ask one more question clarifying? Transportation was identified as a priority among the group. And it seems to have been decided that transportation is responsive and therefore not a big issue. Did we look at transportation times for students? Are some of our students spending more time on the buses than others? And what made it a priority to begin with? How did it wind up on the list? What were the concerns?
Katie, do you want to start?
The category was enrollment and transportation, and so we started with a very broad picture of all enrollment across the district and transportation, and primarily looked at, was every student in need of transportation receiving it? I do not remember if we studied the times.
I think the last report that we're going to look at tonight for the enrollment and facility usage, that actually is more, paints a more detailed picture about where kids are living versus where they are attending, and those transportation needs based on where they are actually attending school. So that's how I think we captured more the aspect of geographic locations of the school versus where students are living.
Right. I would just point out, because this is about equity, that we made the statement 15 minutes per day is 45 hours a year, right? So think about bus times as well, right?
Absolutely. And that, I think, is going to be, those are the deeper questions as we look at all this data as a result of this programming or this choice of where these children go, what is the impact on their day? And I think that's a good question that we will hopefully glean from the future presentations. So for the interest of time, is there anything?
I got one more quick question.
Okay.
Related to the IAR testing, that's an all English test, correct?
Correct.
And then is that K through 8, or is that by a certain grade?
3rd through 8.
3rd through 8. Can we get a 3 through 5 and then a 6 through 8 kind of breakdown, just so we can see it?
We can look at it however you would like. Yes.
I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely. Any other questions while we have DM group with us, and then I will release them to go.
Thank you
Awesome.
very
Well,
much.
thank you
Thank
all
you,
so
DM group.
much. We appreciate your time and all of the work and partnership that you have done with District 59 and getting us where we are today, and look forward to our future work together as well. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your meeting. Night, everyone.
Mr. Bergermo,
Thank you.
I want
Good
to just give you a heads up. I got a congratulatory comment about you, that they hope that you will be more open to the suggestions from the teachers in the bilingual class, well, dual language, whatever, bilingual, because in the past they have complained to the district and the people in charge, and they were not listened to at all. And they thought, after hearing you at the last meeting, that you would be receptive to what they have to say. So I wanted to let you know that.
Yeah, so how about we take a quick 5-minute recess, and then we will come back for the next portion of the presentation.
Language audit. This is our second of three reports we're going to discuss, and we have Joshua. I also want to add, as us board members introduce ourselves, when we're asking questions to the district, can we also give your name and your position so people know who it is? I mean, we see you, but they don't see you. Thank you. On to you, Josh. Good luck.
Good evening. I'm Susan Savage, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction. And tonight, Joshua and I will be presenting on our dual language program evaluation. Before I begin, though, I would like to clarify one thing. Question was asked earlier about bilingual services for TDP. We do have one teacher at Rupley who is bilingual certified. She supports through our TDP instruction, and she's a math interventionist right now. But just for your awareness, somebody brought that to my attention. I heard that as well after my presentation. So, all right, we shall begin. We'll begin by talking and reviewing what we actually looked at in our dual language audit. We had components and we had areas of analysis. So the components that we had within our audit, we had teacher, administrator, and parent focus groups, classroom observations, which included an observation of every single 80-20 model dual language classroom, and a review of district data and curriculum. And when I say district data, we're talking about things such as staffing info, certifications, analysis of our report card, looking at our current scope and sequences for curriculum, looking at our content and language allocation, which is a critical component of dual language programming, and looking at professional development offerings. So these were some of those things in addition to our access district data that she looked at through the process. In addition, the areas of analysis included looking at our program structure, our curriculum, instruction, assessment and accountability, staff quality and professional development, family and community, and support and resources. So those were the areas of analysis. And what we're going to do tonight is I'll present the findings that came from the audit, and then Mr. Bertoma is going to walk through the recommendations that were also written up in the dual language audit. So the key findings in terms of program structure to begin. The first key finding was that our 80-20 model, our vision for dual language, is in great alignment with best practice in terms of the process for including 80% of our time in Spanish, 20% in English, and how we increase over the years to that 50-50 we get to 4th and 5th grade. That is a model that research supports in terms of providing great results for students in terms of the vision. But we'll look through today about areas within that program structure as well as curriculum instruction that we could work to refine and improve. Another key finding was that we noticed inequities between our one-way and two-way programs. Some of those we actually shared at our last meeting where we talked about our class sizes, the differences between the two-way and the one-way, as well as the multi-age, which we just talked about a little bit through our DM group. The other key finding was that the junior high programming and language allocation was unclear. It's mixed in terms of the actual language allocation and content allocation, and has shifted in the last couple of years. That is an area that we need to look at and make sure that we are meeting the non-negotiables of what a dual language program looks like at the junior high level. And we'll go into that a little bit with the recommendations. The other key finding was that we need to look at our building leadership and our district leadership and create a higher level of shared ownership and collaboration with our dual language programming. The findings shared that our building administrators were knowledgeable about our dual language program. However, they often referred to district in terms of decision-making around student placement and programming and couldn't clearly articulate the rationale behind decisions. We are very fortunate that we have a director of multilingual programming, and that was a great strength of our audit, but looking for ways to collaborate with all of our building leaders in that area was a key finding. In terms of curriculum, a major area was the looking at our quality of mentor text and culturally relevant material, and that it differed greatly in quality and quantity from school to school and between our one-way and our two-way programs. We talked a little bit about the pillars of dual language at our last meeting with Mr. Perdomo, and it is extremely critical to all aspects, including biliteracy, sociocultural competence, and grade level achievement, that we are providing authentic materials, and that materials that are not just translated from an English curriculum, so that we have that authenticity that will allow students to meet those pillars of the dual program as it's intended. Our Spanish language arts standards, we also have some standards that are articulated in our scope and sequence. However, we do not have a clear, explicit scope and sequence that identifies the areas in Spanish language arts that are different from the ELA Common Core standards. And that is an area that we are beginning to explore. And the state actually has launched the new standards for Spanish language arts, which we are going to look at in collaboration with our literacy review that we're currently doing. So we're keeping those things in mind. Instruction. In terms of instruction, there was great evidence through our classroom observations that teacher professional development regarding linguistic spaces has taken hold, and you see that across consistently all of our classes and grades in terms of having Spanish language spaces, English spaces, and a space for the metalinguistic analysis. However, one area that we did notice through observations, and we'll talk a little bit about it as well through teacher focus groups, was minimal evidence of the deeper analysis between the two languages that result in that metalinguistic transfer. There were certain reliance on cognates or translation as opposed to some of the deeper practices, and those were not consistent across schools. So things like el dictado, or this is how you say it, as well as getting really deeply into that transfer of language. And Mr. Perdomo will talk about that a little bit more. And then finally, phonics was taught with fidelity, extreme fidelity in both languages. However, phonics was taught in isolation. And looking ahead at our recommendations, we have ideas, suggestions that we might want to look at in terms of looking at our elementary schedule to make sure that we are addressing that issue so that we have a connection to literacy, reading, writing, speaking with our language development, not in isolation. Assessment accountability. One aspect of assessment accountability is having a dual language leadership team. So we had begun the process as this audit was taking place by bringing our team together. That dual language team will be working as our internal group that looks closely at all aspects that we are discussing today, such as program structure, such as curriculum, instruction, professional learning, and that team will be working in tandem with SLT and our work to really look at a 3-year action plan as to what elements of our dual programming improvement we can address. Those action plans will be collaborating and they will connect to our strategic plan as well. Some things you will see have to do with curriculum clarity, some things are going to have to do with alignment of assessment, and we know that we have things moving at different paces. So we will be working with the dual language team to identify the needs, and then we'll be pacing that out to align with our district work. The other area in assessment accountability that we saw in the audit was a lack of clear biliteracy trajectory pathways for both languages and families. Families often did not fully understand how their child was developing in Spanish language development, and that is an area of need. Also aligns to aligned assessment system that we already have identified through our strategic planning. Staff quality and professional development. Through all of the observations from the classrooms, through the focus groups, it was evident that we have a dedicated and passionate staff within our dual language program. However, we noticed that district-wide collaboration opportunities were not evident, and it was often difficult for dual language teachers to collaborate, and we actually saw similar patterns in our DM group. There was a teacher-reported need as well for more biliteracy-focused training. So I talked a little bit about that when we asked that question, but that is definitely a pattern that came out through the observations in the classroom as well as teacher-reported. Family and community was another area that we assessed through the audit. Majority of parents expressed having trustworthy relationships. They expressed feeling welcomed and respected in the buildings and at the district level. However, there was a discrepancy in understanding around programming with one-way and two-way parents. So the one-way parents didn't always fully understand the benefits of the program or what was available as the two-way families, and that, we can anticipate that there's definitely room for growth in that area, and we can see that why this has probably occurred. Communications regarding events and opportunities for parent involvement is inconsistent and sometimes limited, and communication decreases as students move through the program and prepare to transition to junior high. So there were lots of conversations with the families in terms of a lot of information early on, entering the program, even through the first couple of years, but that communication dissipated throughout their experience. Last but not least, in terms of key findings, were support and resources. A great strength from our dual language audit showed that we have a clear commitment to continued improvement and support of our program through all stakeholders that participated in this work. However, equitable access to resources came out as a pattern in terms of very similar results from DM Group, and the fact that by moving our program along, having it at most of our schools has spread us very, very thin with our resources, and we haven't been able to use the economies of scale, as they talked about in DM Group, to really support and provide adequate resources for all of our dual programming.
So thank you, Susan. So Susan talked about our key findings, and I'm Mr. Joshua Perdomo, the new Multilingual Program Director. I know Susan's very excited because I'm in my final stage of my dissertation, so close to being a doctor, but not quite there. So our recommendations as we look at what of our key findings, the first piece is we really want to review and realign our vision and the goals of the dual language program. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we do have a vision statement. It is in our dual language handbook, but what's more important is not just for it to be there, but for our staff, our community, our students to understand what is that vision, what is that goal. So really making sure that we align that and that all of us share that common belief in how we proceed with our program. We do need to look at and identify ways to consolidate dual language programming in order to effectively use resources, enhance the collaboration, and maintain our high quality staff. So that was a recommendation that came from there. Another is to restructure our elementary daily schedules and junior high student pathway to reflect biliteracy instruction requirements. And that would be in content and the language allocation. So as we talked in our first audit reviews, we saw the scheduling is a big, was a concern that we wanted to look at elementary and junior high. Same piece for dual language. How do we look at our dual language schedules? Do they need to be the same? Do they have to be different? What are those non-negotiables that should be part of a dual language schedule in order to ensure our program is being effective, not just mirroring what everything else is? Align the curriculum to state standards that articulates literacy and language development in both Spanish and English through an updated scope and sequence. As Susan mentioned, the Illinois did adopt the new Illinois Spanish standards this past fall. And so Illinois now has the Illinois Spanish standards for language arts, and we need to be implementing those within our scope and sequence to ensure that our students are being fully aware of what our Spanish standards are, as well as what our English standards are, to really get to that level of biliteracy. We need to review the authentic curricular resources in order to meet the pillars of dual language. Again, as Susan mentioned, the translating, and we talked about in dual language, we don't want to translate, we want to transfer language. Transferring language has meaning and allows for that deep understanding. Translating just allows for memorization for the time being. And we really want to make sure that our students are given those opportunities to be exposed to that authentic research, to really see that culture, to really have that opportunity just to be able to identify with those pieces and also see themselves in our curriculum as well. The recommendation is to expand professional development for teachers and administrators around the effective dual language instructional strategies. So el dictado, así se dice, TPR, all the scaffolding, all those best practice strategies that are good for all students, really ensuring that we bring a language, focus on those, and how do we then make sure that those are being implemented with fidelity across all of our classrooms. The recommendation to plan for district-wide collaboration on a consistent basis. There's power in being able to say, kindergarten dual language teachers, let's get together and let's focus, let's plan, let's talk, what's working, that PLC type of model of being able just to really come together and just talk data, talk students, talk program, talk that same language that so we can see that growth within our programming. And then the last recommendation was to increase opportunities for family education in regards to dual language programming. As we talked about in our 2 weeks ago, when we looked at two-way dual language versus one-way dual languages, how do we ensure that all of our families that are coming to District 59 truly know all of the programs that are available to them and what are the benefits of all the programming so they can make the best decision for their child as they're entering kindergarten. So we really want to make sure that we're providing our families that opportunity, that education, not only in kindergarten, because that's the first step, but also what does junior high look like when, once they leave 5th grade, because I know a lot of our families have questions on that as well. Our presentation was fast.
It was. And hopefully what you saw was a lot of connection back to the first presentation, a lot of foundational information that Mr. Perdomo had shared 2 weeks ago that hopefully gave you a lot of greater context for tonight's meeting, which was one of our goals. I think some of the takeaways that you might notice in here, some of these recommendations are universal. They're not just dual language. We need curriculum alignment across all of our classrooms, right? We need collaboration opportunities across all of our classrooms. We need to engage families and better educate them on what opportunities we have across all of our classrooms. But then there are very specific needs of the dual language program, and I think those are the things that we wanted to clarify for you tonight as part of the audit process. And again, while we see these recommendations, we're not going to talk about how we're going to do all these things, because those would be solutions. But if there's greater clarity that you would like to ask or additional data points that you have questions around, this is the team that's ready to answer them tonight or take them down, and we'll come back with more information at our next meeting. So what questions might the board have?
I have a quick clarifying question. This is Robert Mencia with in the audit report itself, when we talk about the home language survey, student is asked if another language is spoken at home. If yes, they take the English proficiency test. Is it assumed that that student is proficient in Spanish, or do we test to see their proficiency in the home language?
So currently, with the home language survey, there are actually 7 questions on the home language survey, 2 of which the state mandates that we ask, which is the language other than English spoken in the household, and then does the child speak another language? If yes is answered to one of those 2 questions, then it triggers the screening for the English assessment, for English services. At that point, we only assess for English proficiency. If the student does not meet the criteria for English proficiency, then the student qualifies for English services. We do not have a screening in Spanish to measure students' Spanish language at that time.
To clarify further, is it that we do not is it that we do not have a screener for Spanish because one is not available under the standards, or is it we just don't have one here?
Currently, we just do not have one here.
This is Courtney Lang, board member. I'm jumping back into the topic from earlier about professional development because I guess I just want to have an understanding of exactly where we are before, again, we think about solutions. But it sounds like, Susan, from your question earlier, any dual language teacher in the district goes through a set orientation related to the dual language program. It was very clear to me from this audit that at a basic level, we seem to be implementing really well the separate spaces in the classroom for the dual language, the bridging between, but that a lot of times that stayed at the level of cognates and like sort of surface level connections. And it was neat for me just to read this. I felt like you almost needed a linguistic degree to understand some of the terminology, but it was just interesting to me to see what those next levels would be beyond the cognates. And so I guess what I'm wondering is, have our teachers at this point had professional development sort of beyond those geographic spaces in the classroom? Here's the bridge, here's the cognates. Have we done professional development related to, for example, like meta language or some of these scaffolding strategies that you mentioned.
Yeah, so from what I know, prior to my arrival to the district, there was a focus on language acquisition and really understanding what is language acquisition and how do we ensure students are acquiring language. I think to your point is to go deeper into the metalinguistic focus of like what syntax and grammar and pragmatics and morphology, those types of pieces. I think there has not been a deeper level of professional development within that context yet of what does the full scope of the bridging look like. There's been plenty, and I think there has been a great deal of professional development around bridging and extension and understanding why we need to do that transfer of language. But I think sometimes the default is because it's easier to grasp when we use cognates or when we use those that as a tool. I think that's a default sometimes because it lends itself better to some of the usage that we're doing in the classroom.
So I'm seeing lots of head nods from some of our dual language teachers in the audience. Is there anything, because I think that this really is a teacher reported aspect of the audit. Is there anything else that our dual language teachers would like to contribute around professional development? Or do you feel that Mr. Perdomo captured I'm getting thumbs up from our audience members. So again, I think that feedback, because Mr. Perdomo has spent quite a bit of time with our teachers, I think that grasp is there and that need and the articulation of the need is really well communicated.
This is Mardell again. I just wanted to continue on there were three things that the teachers I spoke with told me. I mentioned the first one before, that we have to work with each student because in the past there have been students who did not get the extra support that they needed, and that's both dual language students and regular students. In any case, we have to give extra support if it's necessary. They also said that students must be up to grade level by junior high in English because the subjects in junior high are taught in English. And if they aren't going to be up to grade in English, they're going to have a terrible time. And let's see if there's anything else. I think those are the main things.
Yeah, and I think going back to 2 weeks when we talked about, and that goes to the recommendation of revisioning our alignment to what is dual language, our goal, as we talked about 2 weeks ago, is that if we can get our dual language program to be effective and to really take that momentum, we should have all of our students reach proficiency for the English language by the end of 5th grade. That's our ultimate goal. And not only English proficiency, but also that their Spanish is right there with them. So at the end of the day, by 5th grade, we really want to see our students really becoming biliterate, bilingual, and bicultural, so then when they do go to junior high, they do have those same opportunities to not only excel in junior high, but if possible, even go further. Because I think it's really possible as long as we're giving students those equal opportunities.
Well, in our scores this year, the criteria, they didn't meet it at all. I mean, it was the public. I got calls from the public, my word, there's 70% didn't even make it, and they were very upset because they had not reached the criteria. Whereas basically in the old days when I was on the board and we had the bilingual situation, the idea was to get them by 4th or 5th grade into a general education classroom so they would be with all English children and so forth. And we pretty well made that situation, not in every single case, but most cases.
Yeah, I think a little bit of the historical context too is we also want to know that the WIDA assessment for access changed. So the criteria for exiting used to be less rigorous than what it currently is now. The exiting criteria used to be a 4.2, whereas now it's a 4.8. And the reason for that exit criteria being shifted was not only because we were seeing a large influx of students exiting, which was giving a false positive that students were actually doing really well. But as you continue to monitor students, because the state requires everybody to monitor, all districts to monitor ELs after they exit for 4 years to identify how they're doing academically. And when you do that research and you look at the students that are former ELs now that have exited with that previous criteria, they were not being as successful in the secondary level, middle school and especially high school. They saw a a larger percentage of those students were either being retained, were failing classes, or just didn't have that academic level to really, more remedial classes in order for them to get to that level. Now that we have that 4.8, that's also why WIDA has changed and the state has changed their vision, because it used to be they wanted students to exit access within 3 years with that old criteria, and that's why now it's shifted to 5. Because, again, with more the research that has been out there and the more research that has been shown, we're really asking students to get to that academic level. In the past, we were only asking students to get to that social language level, and which was, then we were missing all of that academic content. So I do agree that we had a higher percentage of students exiting, but I think it was because our criteria for cut scores was different than what it currently is now. And I think now when students do exit, they truly are showing proficiency. And I think we're seeing a better outcome as we look at that 4-year trend for former ELs on how they're performing academically. They're actually maintaining where they need to be and or doing better because of the fact that they were given those supports for a longer period of time.
Now, in the past, we used to not teach Spanish to anybody until 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I know we're still doing that in part of the district. Are we doing it at all 3 of our junior highs?
So all 3 of our junior highs do have a dual language program currently, yes. So not all classes are taught in Spanish, but we do have students that do they alternate between Spanish and English for their literacy block, and then our dual language students have a Spanish heritage elective class that is really for that maintenance and keeping up with that Spanish, but at a different level now, right? It's not your introduction to Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
It's really making sure that we're able to write effectively, communicate effectively. So it's a deeper level of Spanish understanding once we get to that junior high level.
It used to be that French and Spanish were both offered. Are they still or not?
French and Spanish are still offered as a world language, yes, and those are offered as an introductory level course, not as a dual language offering, because our students in the Spanish, in the middle school, it's really more for students that are just being exposed to the Spanish language and they're learning those basic communication skills in either French or Spanish. Whereas the Spanish heritage class for our dual language students, it's beyond that introductory of like introducing yourself, being able to have, conversations. It's much deeper than that now because they've had 5 years of language support within
Well, that makes sense for the dual language students, but what about English-speaking students who have never had any association with a foreign language? They would still be able to get into a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade class in French or Spanish as a regular foreign language student.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I just want to clarify. So in order for a child to exit in that 5 year, they would start in kindergarten and then go to 5th grade and then be eligible to exit because they would have had that 5 years of intensive education, correct?
No, so what it is we would want students, so kindergarten doesn't count as a year of service.
Right.
So that's why by the end of 5th grade, and we don't get our results, unfortunately, till the following year, so that's why they say by the time they enter 6th grade, they should have exited. That doesn't mean a student can't exit beforehand. Any student could exit way before that if that's the level of proficiency. Language is very fluid. So every student learns at a different pace. The language, acquisition comes very differently for others, just like as children learn to talk and speak and that developmental stage. So I think what we want to be able to say is that within those 5 years, so from kindergarten through, so technically it's 6 years, but really it's 5 years in the eyes of the state, our students are becoming linguistically proficient in English by the time they get to 6th grade. But they can absolutely exit beforehand. Yeah, there's nothing holding them back that says you cannot exit until that.
But they need to reach that 4.8 so that they actually exit with the knowledge that they need, and then we're not just pushing them out.
Correct. 4.8 is the minimum that they would need in order for them to exit to meet criteria, correct.
Wouldn't it be more beneficial if they make it to the 4.8 or 5 or whatever is close by 6th grade, that they exit and go into regular classes so they're more English-speaking people all the time and can learn to be friends with English-speaking people and practice their English?
So I think what we want from our students is we want more of that inclusivity, right? Just like special education talked about that inclusivity and really that opportunity to be able to integrate with other students. And that's what we're doing at the junior high. So our junior high students are not just with Spanish-speaking students. They really are integrated with the content of math. The only class that they're in dual language for is literacy. and then the Spanish elective if they choose to do that. For math, for their other elective courses, science, social studies, it's an integration. We want all of our students to be able to work together and to be able to develop their own language. So it's absolutely that inclusivity is what we want to see, and I think we want to see that across all grade levels, not just junior high.
That's our goal.
Yeah.
So a question related to the leadership team for this. So one of the things that I've greatly appreciated when, bridging this to other areas, when we did our curriculum updates in the past year, is that we're implementing a process so that there is periodic review of that curriculum. So I'm wondering, with this dual language leadership team, obviously they're going to have like some triaged next steps related to the audit, but do we foresee them or another group being like implementing an ongoing review process going forward?
Yeah, okay, for the dual language leadership team, in terms of their role in this process, is that they will identify the key components of what a 3-year action plan should look like for improvements to the dual language program, and I'll feel free to chime in anytime. In terms of the review, this leadership team should be one that stays and maintains, and that we are constantly evaluating our program in relation to the specific key elements and components of a quality dual language program. So that is the role right now of the dual language leadership team, is they're diving into each one of those components. They're looking at those in context of District 59, where are we doing all right? Where do we have areas to grow? And then identifying through that process, which also includes a deep dive into the data, the access data, our path to proficiency, and then from there, identifying our 3-year plan. However, this team should be in existence and should continue to evolve and meet in a regular, consistent manner. And feel free to add anything else.
Did a great job.
Okay.
So not a point of clarification, but more an observation. We talk about, in the DM group, we talk about the collaboration, and we talk about scheduling. And we brought up scheduling and collaboration in dual language. Now, a scheduling for a monolingual classroom is a lot different than it is for a dual language. So kind of my observation is I would like to see how this is going to work out, or how is it going to work out. Knowing that
You want to see the solution, Randy.
No, it's
you
not-
can say it.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like I'm interested to see it, but I'm more like how
How are you gonna do it?
yeah, how are you going to do it if we're, if we have, DM says, a consistent schedule is important across all schools. But is that across programs too then, within schools, or we'd have maybe 2 different schedulings? And that's the part that, I want to make sure that, we're going down this, we're bringing these 2 audits together. They've identified very similar items that we need to address. But how are we going to address them? That's what I want to see, and I can't wait to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a key piece for us is looking at it within where are opportunities for flexibility? Where's the loose and tight, right? So do we have to look at each of our programs? Because again, we're basing all of this on student needs. So different students have different needs. So while we want consistency across programs, but that might look different. So for example, a schedule for a kindergartner might look different than a schedule for a 5th grader because it's developmentally appropriate, even though they're right now within the same school. So that's where we have some flexibility within those systems. And so it's building those priorities and drivers as we develop the schedules to allow for maximum flexibility to meet the needs of the students while creating the greatest sense of consistency to be able to operate and manage and, accurately implement. It's complex.
I have a clarification question based on what Randy had asked. This is Robert Mancia again. When we talk about collaboration time, take me into the classroom so I understand. Is this a set period that the teachers have, or is it the equivalent of like walking across the hall to bounce ideas across with teachers? Like what how is it
I would say collaboration time for teachers exists across a lot of things. When we talk, you've heard PLCs mentioned a couple times, professional learning communities. When you talk about very structured collaboration time that's designed to really reflect on instructional practices, review data, that needs to be protected time. That is what we have not yet achieved consistently across. There's contractual time that's developed through the, associated, the association's agreement as to what is allocated for planning and time where they are not responsible for providing instruction to students. So there are a lot of moving parts to find that time. When we look at, for example, our early release time on Wednesdays when our students leave, there is time and how we use it and whether we use that time for collaboration or professional development or whatever, that's all part of the planning process. So I think what we have to look at is where are our times available? How do we look at it? And how do we find that protected time so that teachers can do what they need to do to teach, but also have that time to collaborate with their peers, both vertically, horizontally, and across programs.
Okay.
I think one thing that we did at the last meeting, and that was Ross's project, was to enhance the profitability for people to come and be substitutes in our district. I don't know if it's helped that much yet, but I think it was a very good thing to do because I don't know if it was at all schools, but I know in some schools, teachers had to take their free period and go and teach in a classroom because they needed substitutes so badly. That obviously shouldn't have to happen, and hopefully your program will increase our number of people coming in to substitute.
Hold on, let me add a comment. So that was a discussion that was something we discussed in closed session since it related to wages and staffing issues. We have since released a updated schedule of payment for substitute teachers to address that, but that was not discussed in the board meeting. That was discussed during closed session, so I want to make sure everyone's just aware of that for clarification purposes. Sorry, Courtney.
I was just going to ask another clarifying question. So one of the things pointed out in the audit was that there was a lack of evidence of materials and instruction related to socio-cultural competence, and then notions of deep culture and kind of differentiating between these superficial cultural items, food, dress, whatever it may be, and then like these deeper value systems, we might say. So I guess I was wondering where we stand right now in terms of materials, like curriculum related to those items, and have we delved into any professional development on those items?
I can start and then you can continue. Where we are currently in terms of that piece is because we are looking at our priority standards for literacy, we began our work with our Literacy Council focused on literacy to identify priority standards. And then from there, we're going to overlap that with the Spanish language arts standards. And then we're going to look at what do we need to do K-5 to address reviewing resources for both monolingual classes as well as the dual language classrooms, knowing that we want to be very, very cautious about paying particular attention to authentic resources for dual language teachers. In terms of that piece, I can, if you want to add anything else about the deeper knowledge of the professional learning, that would be part of ongoing professional learning training as well as through the work and setting our drivers and beliefs around that in order to identify what our appropriate resource would be. And if you want to add anything else.
No, I was just going to say, so what Susan mentioned is correct, but I think to answer the question as well as right now, I think there's a gap in bringing in that culture, that deep culture with a sense of dual language. So ensuring that that is part of our programming is something that I think we have a gap in right now.
On that note, clarifying question again, this is Robert. The district relies on Lucy Calkins' translated materials for dual language. Have we ever had, if you know, Spanish-specific curriculum materials for the dual language program? Or how long have we been using or relying on Lucy Calkins?
So I know the district in the past has had, Spanish resources. And I say resources because I think what we want to look at is it's not about the actual program being the curriculum. It's more of how do we find resources to support what those standards are, because there's never going to be that full curriculum that's going to have everything we need in it. So the district has looked at that, and the district does have, beyond Lucy Calkins, it has Fonética Gramática, it has used Estrellitas, it has used Pasaporte. It has used other different, tools within its scope. I think as we continue to develop, one of the things that we're continuing to look at is how do we ensure that we're not mirroring English, but instead we're authentically teaching Spanish for Spanish and not a la carte English.
Right.
I think that's what we want to continue to look at moving forward.
Okay, so we have a third segment. We are coming into the home stretch here. Are we ready, board, to move on? Or you want to take a...
for 2 seconds.
Okay, take a quick stretch break. We'll switch out our...
Thank you,
Drive safely.
ladies.
Thank you.
So I've been monitoring our numbers throughout. We've been averaging upper 170s, over 200. So I'll be interested when I get back to the table to see where they're at after my role here.
It just dropped down to 5, Tom.
Are you worried about losing some, Tom?
Not at all. Everyone's about the numbers.
We
So
know
yes,
that
we're. My role is to share the enrollment and facility utilization analysis. This is something really to really quick to recognize Ron, who got this process restarted after it was paused throughout COVID. So I'm going to jump into the slides and we'll go from there. So some of the key components we'll share is this piece. It's really called the live and attend information. So this is our preschool, and what you can see is how many kids, and this data is from really last fall. So when they started pulling all this together, so like we have 268 kids in the ELC now, not 230, but really shows of those 230, where do they come from in regards to our schools? And I guess I'll challenge the group with a question. Anything jump out at you as you look at where our kids in the ELC come from?
Oh, it's mostly regional based still.
Say that again, please.
It's regionally based. It's located around the
All
learning
right.
center.
So Forest View has the most kids. Forest View, it's on the basically same site complex. So it does stand out the farther away from the ELC, the north side. In Mount Prospect, the less kids attend. So the Elk Grove Village numbers are on the lower side. Absolutely correct. Great job. This next piece is a map of our elementary schools. So this shows each color represents a different school. So you could see if I jump at the bottom here, we're kind of right here. That's Admiral Byrd. Their attendance area also actually flows over here. Same with Salt Creek. They have another extended piece. And then you could see all the boundaries for all of our schools across the district. As we were going through this, Dr. Bresnahan pointed out, when you really start to dig in, where do kids live? And then Ben put this together. Those browned out, blacked out pieces, those basically are all industrial areas throughout our communities. So there are large areas of attendance areas where no kids live at all. And if you, especially here in Elk Grove, you probably already know that along that I-90 corridor. But just to point that piece out. So jumping to elementary, again, this is where students attend and where students live. So just to walk through this, you can see our elementary schools along the top. If we look at Admiral Byrd again, as they analyzed Admiral Byrd in that boundary area, I'm really careful. I used to call it homeschool, your homeschool area. That's the school down the street. I think as we've really dug into this, we recognize it and want to use boundary more often because we know kids might not be attending the school that's closest to where they live. So for Byrd, 367 kids live in that area. Of those 367, 296 actually go to the school. And then when we look to the left of that, you see 317 kids actually attend right now. So if we flow across, 296 attend. Of those 317, 296 are from the Byrd area. 17 are from the Claremont area, 2 from Rupley, 2 from Salt Creek. So that's how you can read this piece. A good example, if you look at Claremont, because it houses the one-way dual language Polish program, we have kids from basically every school in the district who attend. And then you can see how that compares across each and every school. As it flows down the bottom, a couple lines, you can see Ridge. Ridge is basically an open enrollment school. Kids are eligible from anywhere in the district, and you can see how, again, that goes. Anything stand out there? Similar to the ELC? Closer the school, it appears anyway, the more the kids attend there, where Brentwood is probably the farthest away, has the least amount of kids. Okay, our next slide. Now we'll see the junior high map. Obviously, junior highs, 3 junior highs serving 11 elementary schools. You can see how this flows. Again, we'll see the map when you show where kids don't live, and how that flows across each of those communities. And then if we go to the next slide, we'll see very similar live and attend. Now what's interesting and expected, when you take lots of schools and combine them into one school, those pieces start to balance out. So you can see a majority of our kids who live in the Friendship area actually attend. And while it might not be every single kid of those 43 that live out and attend in, a lot of that's connected to district programming, specifically special ed programming. So Grove houses the LS program, Friendship houses the cross-categorical instructional program, so most of those kids fall into those categories. So most kids who live in those large attendance areas attend that school at the junior high level. Now this piece breaks down the utilization piece. So based on, we worked with architects over the years, different groups to determine, okay, what's the capacity for a school? And basically that's based on how many kids can fit in a classroom. It's the best way I can describe it, really simply. So you can see for Byrd, they say 438 kids is the capacity number. At 317, that means they're at about 72% utilization. As you look across each schools, Brentwood has our highest utilization for elementaries at 87%. Juliet Low has the lowest at 41%. And then you could see all kind of flow on each side of that.
This is Courtney Lane. Can I ask a clarifying question on this one?
I figured there would be one.
This really surprised me, to be honest, just because of being part of conversations in the past about overcrowding at certain buildings, and to see that our maximum capacity is at 87%. So can you explain whether that number is actually realistic, or does it have to do with grade levels, or what is
Yeah, I think the numbers are realistic. There's some, as we've looked at other things, there's some groups will look at functional capacity, how you use your school. There's different ways to look, but those numbers are pretty consistent. I can share, at least from my perspective, the reality of Juliet Low. Before the ELC was built, Juliet Low was basically our Northside preschool. The addition that was added to that school a number of years ago was an 8-room addition. It also housed our complete LOP program. So when those programs moved, or when we built the ELC, now they had space. Whereas at one point, I think 6 of the classrooms were early childhood classrooms. So, and that, addition was supposed to be 2 rooms, and due to the economy turned into 8 because it costs the same amount of money. So that, at least the way I recall it. So those pieces, you could see how that flows across each and every school. Most of our schools are in the 50s to 60s, and then some a little bit higher. Our schools are all different sizes based on original buildings, renovations, and additions, and everything that goes with that.
And I'll just add kind of to your question, Courtney, when we look at the utilization, I think part of what we had talked about earlier around a facility alignment study is that the needs within a classroom have changed over the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? So when we look at furniture, when we look at small group instruction, when we look at flexible seating, when we look at a more inclusive classroom that requires different, that has students with different needs within the classroom. All of those factors have evolved a lot over time. So living at 87%, I would guess that Brentwood probably feels like they're living at 110. So we were trying to really look at like what would be a reasonable number within here, and what's our most comfortable building that doesn't feel like it has too much space or is not overcrowded. And we kind of targeted 80%. That was just our team talking. So I think looking at how the classroom space is used, the furniture, the makeup of the students, the grade level of the students, all of those factors have to be considered. How we teach, the size of technology. Now they've got devices on every desk. All of those things really play into this, and leads me to say we need a deeper and further analysis around these things before we make long-term decisions about our buildings.
So I think what I'm hearing then is that the functional capacity may be different than the capacity from an architecture perspective of how many people can fit in a room.
Exactly, and I wouldn't classify it necessarily as even the architect's perspective. I think it's a square footage capacity versus the actual utilization of the space in terms of purpose. So that has really changed. How our kids learn has changed a lot over the last several decades.
To that point, can I ask, is there a difference between a kindergarten classroom and a fifth grade classroom in terms of the number of students you can fit per square footage?
In some of our buildings, it's very obvious in the design. Kindergarten rooms were designed differently, larger, different types of space. In some buildings, depending on when they were renovated, that might not have been an option.
Okay, so when I see
I don't think the number factors in age of students.
It does not.
Right.
So it could be a fifth grade classroom or a first grade classroom, and the max would still be the same.
Okay, so you could flip classrooms, right? You could have what's currently categorized as kindergarten space. You could move a fifth grade classroom in there, and it'd be the same amount of space.
I think these are purely square footage. There's other components like bathrooms and play space and hard surfaces, that kind of stuff. Yes. But in square footage terms, I believe, yes, that's how this calculation was configured.
Okay, thank you.
A year or two ago, when we were considering putting on an addition to Brentwood and Claremont, not that we were actually talking about it, but they were overcrowded, and it was a couple $1 million, and we said no, so we had to figure out other, but you can see why, because those are the two largest, the two most
They feel it.
Yep.
filled up schools.
So then this next piece really also looks at the schools in regards to demographics. So when we look at race and ethnicity, free and reduced and paid lunch, and then multilingual and special ed, you can see again how, based on current numbers, where you start to see the ranges, similarities and differences across each of our schools. Some are very consistent, and at times, other times inconsistent in regards to these major pieces.
I'm going to pose Tom's question. And is there anything that stands out in terms of this data? It's a lot to take in. But again, remember, we were going to challenge ourselves to talk about our core values and our current state. And so do we see anything that jumps out to us that may lead us to ask more questions?
Yeah, this is Robert. There are schools that are overwhelmingly Hispanic, and there are schools that are overwhelmingly white, and there's you're not seeing an equal distribution, and there's a million reasons why, but you're not seeing it in the data.
Yeah.
We have pockets of Spanish who live in certain areas, and so obviously they're going to be moved over into this one school, and that makes it look out of balance, but it really isn't, because they're coming from the same place.
Yeah, I think when you flow across each of those kind of our highest populations, starting with Asian from 2% to 33% is the range. our African American or Black families 2 to 10%, or 1, I'm sorry, to 10%. Hispanic flows from 14 to 71, and white 11 to 78. You can really see that range start to flow, and it flows across also into the free and reduced lunch. It jumps out that way. Multilingual. Special ed, not so much. Where you see those larger numbers, those are where we house district special ed programs, and they're included in these numbers.
Let me ask a clarifying question. This is Robert. One of the first slides you showed us was the actual district boundary map for each school. And one thing that caught my eye was there's like a pocket next to John Jay where those kids travel all the way to Low. And do we know why? Like and I'm thinking of what Dr. Sager said earlier of, you think that transportation time over the course of a year, and
Yeah, I would believe, and I'll share something towards the end, that back in the late 80s, early 90s, there were boundary decisions made to try to balance out enrollments and the demographics of different schools, and I believe that that occurred about that time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just encourage all of us to ask if something stands out, then we want to ask the question why. We cannot make any assumptions about any of this data. It requires such deep levels of analysis. I think for tonight's purpose, we really want to see what stands out that we want to investigate further that tells us this does not seem like it is in alignment with our core values. So we want to explore further why that is. If there is a very, rational reason, that's one thing. If it's something that was created by the system, that's an entirely different piece. So I know if we let Tom get to the end of this, I think we're gonna start to uncover and answer some of these wonderings.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it. So moving on to junior high, capacity-wise, you can see we swing from 65% utilization at homes to 95% at Grove. And that 883 at Grove the 883 at times has been closer to the 930 or even closer to 1,000. So you can see the swing in a similar way. It's a little tighter, but at the same time, pretty big difference. That's hundreds of kids. That's 400 kids difference between.
I think it's pretty different between the three. Looks quite different to me.
That's the thing, the numbers were what were staggering to me, not just junior high, but elementary. When you see the small amount of spaces that are left, and it just seemed like, wow.
Yeah, great point. So the next slide then gets into the demographics. Now again, we saw that piece where it kind of balances out as you get to the middle school level, larger communities. It does balance out somewhat here, although you can still see some of those larger ranges or specific groups that jump out, in certain ways based on the communities where kids live. I don't know if anything jumps out to the group.
Well, I just happen to know why Grove has more of the Hispanics, because they have the mobile home park over on Chewy. That's why their numbers are higher.
Again, I would refrain from making any assumptions, but that would be a question as to why something is, and then we can dig in deeper.
Deeper, absolutely. All right, so this next piece, it is not a storm radar. I stole that from somebody from the group, but this is one thing they put together. This is a heat map, and basically they're showing places this is the elementary piece, where higher concentrations of students live. So that deep red piece is 123 to 254, I think it is. So you can see there are pockets where there's high density of kids, and that flows down to when you get to the very light, either light gray or even white colors, how it flows across different points in the community. Anything stand out?
Well, for the colors, this is largely population density, right? So it's spacing between buildings.
Yes,
and apartments.
Multifamily housing, high density housing with lots of kids in those communities. When Elk Grove and this whole area really started, it was almost all of these homes were young families, and then that changed over time. But yeah, you can see how it really stands out across the district. The next slide, basically the same exact, just for the junior high. They dropped the numbers a little bit just because you go from 6th grade levels to 3, but exactly the same. So in this piece, as we were digging into this, wanted to provide some background in regarding attendance areas and board policy. There's actually board policy that governs this piece and really requires the superintendent to review boundaries annually, recommend any changes. You can see this, so this is current policy. This line, students living in a given school attendance area shall attend that school area. This addition is something that's very unique to District 59 in that we have an open transfer process where parents can request to go to a school outside of their boundary. We average about 40 to 60 of those requests a year. And that is a unique piece to District 59, has been in place as long as that I've been at the district level, and I think probably into the 90s at least it started. So that piece, just wanted to highlight something that's different. This is the press update that came out November, December, and the board will be reviewing and approving or looking at in the near future. You could see where they added some very new language. So it's, the job of the superintendent to review those boundary lines, but also, or it states, creates new units using a lens that considers preventing segregation and the elimination of separating students in the district schools because of color, race, or nationality. Obviously, it's a reality of the world we live in today, and now going from discussion to policy. So something to clearly we'll be adopting in the near future, but something that guides this process as we move forward. And the other piece I just wanted to highlight, and as a district, a superintendent, a board goes through that process, you need to make all these records available to the public. It needs to be an open public process. So everyone knows what's going on. And, this board absolutely is great about being so transparent. So we're not worried about that at all. But those are new pieces coming forward. And then this last piece, special kudos to Cindy Pullen, who really was the researcher / archivist around this piece. So this is basically, I'm not going to speak to all of these, but a window of the last 30 plus years in District 59. You see back in the late 80s, 90s, there were a few boundary changes where they moved some multifamily housing. They moved a line in Elk Grove of where kids would go to either Claremont or Salt Creek. And then outside of really a change and then that change reversed, everything really that has occurred is related to programming. And those programming pieces most often have focused on special ed, multilingual students, or our early childhood program. I think the other piece, and I bolded it just so it would stand out, it appears as if then some of instead of boundary changes, classroom additions were started to be made to schools to keep kids where they were. Also in 2001, that's when Ridge opened. The board actually in 98, 99, the board approved that structure and then opened Ridge in 2001, 02. Some programs, we used to have a LICA program, that's a program for hearing impaired, was housed in the district, moved out of the district. But just to highlight this piece, kids who went to Byrd for K-5, and in this piece, when they started 6th grade, they went, instead of Grove, they went to Friendship. That was in place until 13, 14, where it was reversed and kids went back. That's really the last boundary change that has occurred. At the same time, we opened the ELC, which then classrooms at Ridge, Juliet Low, John Jay, and over time other schools housed early childhood classes. Those all closed. That allowed us, though, if you were part of the board or part of that process, to open full-day kindergarten classes at every site in the district. And then there was some consolidation of let me jump back up here. We moved to multilingual programs returning to their home school, almost all home schools or boundary schools. and then expanded two-way dual at Juliet Low and John Jay. There it is. There's where it started, two-way dual Spanish at Salt Creek. So a lot has happened. I think to Dr. Bresnan's point, this is an accumulation of lots of decisions over lots of years by lots of different leaders, boards, to try to address and manage a changing programming, enrollment, everything that goes into our diverse community. And you can see there are times where groups came together, made recommendations. Sometimes changes were made, sometimes they weren't. And we're at that point now, but in my experience, not with the other pieces we went through tonight. The equity, information and audit, the dual language audit, to really understand the impact those decisions can have. You know, this shouldn't drive it, that should drive it.
I think that 2006, 2007 transfer from Grove to Friendship, that was done by the Boundary Committee because it was very controversial. And when they made the move, they moved an entire family. They didn't just move a
Correct.
child out of a grade, the whole family moved.
And if I recall correctly, that was the last year the Boundary Committee formally met on a regular basis. So clarification, we kind of hit most of them hopefully during, we were efficient with that piece. Any other clarifying questions in regards to this info?
Yeah, so just to clarify too, so the boundaries themselves are not set by the state. They're set by recommended by the superintendent, recommended by the superintendent at the time. The board votes on that. Okay.
Yeah, at one point, District 59 had almost 12,000 students and 21 schools back in the 70s. As enrollment changed, 7 of those schools closed. Many are in our communities as Park District programs. This used to be Lively Junior High. So some were torn down, and so lots of change occurred over time. But
My
yes.
kids were in a school, and every locker had 2 people in it.
So Tom, this is Courtney Lang. I guess a further clarifying question, I'm not expecting you to answer right now, but similar to what Cindy has done here and tagging off of Robert, I would love to see for those school boundaries that have an extended piece. So he mentioned Juliet Low. I know that Bird, Salt Creek, there's extended pieces. Can we get some kind of history or understanding on why the boundary of those schools is not contiguous and connected? And again, not right now, but just for our further understanding of why did these boundaries end up the way they did?
Yeah, absolutely. I can say at least what I understand historically, where boundaries were extended or changed in that manner, oftentimes it related to the community. Enrollment being so small, it was either we expand the boundary or we close the school. That's I recall that because I spoke to the former principal of Juliet Low who helped lead that back in the probably early 80s. But I don't. We can try to figure that out. It's a great question.
I kind of would like to, I know we have this demographic study that we did, and I know it's pretty consistent for what we have now, but I think we can't go into the detail, but in the history, but can we kind of get some, 10, 20-year historical demographic information too? Because I think that's kind of what led to some of the decisions that were made over the last 20 to 30 years.
Yes, I think you're accurate that if you could see that blue book sitting over there, historically, if someone might have remembered the name, Wally Wangell used to do an annual, every year, a blue book report that included a lot of that information. Now that dates back to 2009, I think the last year before you retired from the district. But that gives us, I have a few of those where we can go and say, what were the demographics in this year? And what were the, and I think it's even by school. So we can get some good historical information very easily.
I think if we just look at it, if it goes back to 2009, I think looking at just 2009 would be, that's 12, 13 years ago, would be, I think, a good
Excellent.
kind of just to see that
Already have
information.
it. So Wally, if you're listening in, thank you for doing that.
Saving time, a lot of time.
He's your one listener now, Tom.
We're down to one? All right.
And just, I think following up, Dr. Bresnahan, you had explained, and it makes perfect sense hearing the explanation, how the evolution of how we teach and therefore the evolution of how we set up a classroom has evolved over time. So I think the other piece of information that would be helpful to me is maybe another column in that chart of, you said, you know, ideal is 80%, or like what would be sort of optimal capacities, and maybe it's very simple and it's just 80% down the line, I don't know. But if we say that our teaching and learning is the driver, which it is, and how we use our spaces, then what's our starting point for that?
I think we could absolutely pick a target and, you know, ballpark that. I do think that there are really more in-depth tools to, if we really said, hey, we want to look at reconfiguring or repurposing our schools to be in better alignment with our teaching and learning, that's where I think that in-depth study to layer in with this would be really valuable, because then you're looking space by space as opposed to just generalities where sometimes you're going to end up retrofitting some stuff into spaces that might not be ideal. But absolutely, like I literally took what we had, I did an 80% and then saw where could we grow, where could we shift, just to start a brainstorming process of what could it look like.
Right. I don't mean to imply by the question that I see that as like an ultimate solution, but just another data
Layer of
piece
data
to help
point.
us see like where
Yes, I
might
have
things
that.
need
Mhm.
addition.
I think Robert kind of asked about this. For the schools, do we have a sense for transportation times for each school, like the median transportation time for the various buildings, especially those ones that have the boundaries that are very, you know, sort of spread out? And when you look at the heat maps, the distributions are a little strange. Right?
Yeah, I think we can work with, I have it in my notes also, with Mary Gonzalez, our transportation coordinator, who can probably help us
Yeah, I
with
think
that.
almost doing it school by school and saying this school has this much transportation.
Get some sort of average time, yes.
So you're saying like, but not only transportation time, but how about the number of students that are transported by bus and the number that are not transported by bus? I think would be another key input.
Yeah,
And I think we might actually want to look at like also the median of that, because like, for example, when we're looking at the boundary for Bird, if we just
specifically thinking
average
of
those
Bird, right?
two,
Yeah.
right, like that might average out fairly nicely, but to see the range and the median of that
I
might
think the
actually
median's
paint
more
a different
important,
picture. So we can, that would be a good deep dive into that, into that work.
Yeah.
It's a good group of slides that you had this tonight.
All of these slides were from Cropper, for the most part, and then from Cindy's help. Ben helped put it together. Yes, we're very fortunate to have access to information that helps us have the discussion.
So this is a snapshot of the district now. Did they give us any information about, like, we can expect changes or any major issues to appear in the
Yeah,
future?
it was not included in this initial part of the study, but that is something to get out projections if we wanted to say, okay, where are we looking in terms of these areas, in terms of growth and population? I think we can engage with Cropper as we look at some possible scenarios. I think that would be another added layer of data that we could go back to Cropper and ask for.
When we get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who's like 0 to 5 kids right now, and those that were like population, like real estate trends?
Right.
When we worked with them back in 2012-13, they gave us a 15-year enrollment projection, although we're really clear, after 5 years, anything goes. But you can, I think they're pretty comfortable saying they can give you a 5-year projection based on birth rates, current population. That's their science that they're able to do that.
So is that something I think we would want to see? I see enough heads nodding that,
Yeah.
okay. Do we have any other questions for
Thank you,
Tom,
Tom.
or is he off the hook?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, so hopefully, if we think back to our, 3 hours ago when we began this journey, what our purpose was tonight, hopefully you have found some compelling data that tells you that we have some things that we want to take a deeper dive into, some things that we are already, I feel very proudly that we're already addressing and working on. And that is kudos to this team, kudos to the strategic plan there are things that are absolutely moving forward. So I think for the purpose of really looking at next steps in our timeline is that we really want to take the opportunity now to sit with this, gather more data, ask more questions, and get out to our community to educate and engage our community members, because, you know, we had, I think, 200 so visitors. We'll have this up and in video format for other people to see the recorded version of this. We will have the full reports posted. We will have the presentations posted. So all of that will be available. But how do we package that? And again, remember, communication is on our strategic plan. So how are we going to more broadly engage community members in understanding our current reality? Because for many people as individuals, they may not see any issues right now. And so it's a matter of understanding that while this might not be impacting me and my child and my family today, it might be impacting my neighbor across the street, or it might be impacting me in 3 to 5 years from now, and then it's going to more deeply impact me. So we would like to take that opportunity over the next couple months to really do that, and then start reflecting on our change process, because in order to address these things and fix that tree, to fix that system, we really are going to have to engage in some hard decision making. We heard history of boundary changes and program changes. Those did not come without pushback and scrutiny and people who were deeply impacted by those changes. And we have to engage and understand what is the long-term gains that we are looking for, and what are those parameters and the things that we know are going to be challenges or potentially sacrifices that are going to have to be made in order to reach the goals of the strategic plan and to be in alignment with our core values. I want to really embrace our motto of go slow to go fast. While we have created a sense of urgency, it is really important that we think deeply on these things, not fall into a position where we make assumptions, because someone might watch this presentation tonight and might say, well, let's just change that boundary. We've been down that path, and the boundary lines are moving targets. That might be part of a long-term solution, but it might not be the whole solution. So we want to look and have time and permission and support from the board to engage in that deeper analysis, so that we can spend the coming months through spring and into summer of really analyzing and preparing some potential solutions for discussion, and then educating around those, hearing more voices, and ultimately having a plan. What will we do for the immediate future in 22-23, but what will be for the long term in 23-24 and beyond? In the coming months, we will already have things planned and recommended for 23-24. We've already committed to certain things: the junior high schedule, the elementary schedule. And while those are not board approved items, adding the personnel and resources that it might take to achieve those schedules and make them effective will be something that the board will be asked to approve. So we already know those things are moving forward. We're moving forward with trying to find solutions so that we do not continue the practice of multi-grade classrooms for our dual language program. That is something that I believe we can commit to and find solutions in the short term. We are also already looking at our ELC. I think we've already committed as a board to exploring how we can maximize that facility and that resource. But the challenge, after we're doing all those things that are already in progress, is looking at the rest of the data to tell us, did the data you saw tonight align with the core values that have been identified for this district? And that would be the question I would actually really like to hear individually from our board members as to, is that a yes, is that a no? And maybe then the item to reflect on is, what are your areas of highest priority that seem out of alignment if your answer is no?
Or is it our turn to, can we go? Yeah. This is Robert Mancia, if anyone's still listening. So when I read the reports, or when I read the reports, I get very frustrated. And I'm going to say no, that we're not hitting our core values. Absolutely not. And I get very frustrated because one of the strengths that's identified in these reports is that we're resource rich. That's one of the benefits. We're resource rich. We approved $1.6 million for light bulbs 2 weeks ago, you know. We have all this money. That's one of the benefits here. And then you're reading these reports, and teachers are photocopying, making their own workbooks, you know, or they don't have the tools that they need to teach the kids, so therefore those kids don't have the tools that they need to succeed, not just in our district, but if we want them to be successful for life, they're at a disservice right from the get-go if they don't have those tools. You know, so that's, you know, when I'm reading the first thing that came in my mind was, and that's one of the questions I asked Joshua today too, was, you know, I put myself in their shoes, or I put the shoe on the other foot, for example. Would this district buy a curriculum from Spain that teaches kids in Spain how to read in Spanish, but translate it to teach kids how to read in English? We wouldn't. But that's what we're doing. You know, that's exactly what we're doing. You know, so if it's a lack of leadership, or if it, like in the past, or if it's a lack of attention to the matter, I mean, it's good that we're doing it now, because my kid is in the dual language program. You know, so I'm looking at this as a dad going like, okay, this is not what I expected when I signed up my child for dual language 2 years ago. You know, so it's we have the resources, now we have the attention on it. Let's figure out how to fix it. You know, so it's as good. Let's have these discussions, take it slow, but fix it.
I'm gonna second Robert on no, I do not feel that the data we were presented with tonight is consistent with our core values. And I think on top of that, in this district, I'm proud that we do try to have a core value we talk about regularly on equity. And I think what is especially disappointing to me is I feel like we are failing some of our population groups that need us the most. And I think the state of the one-way Spanish program is dire. And when I look at the fact that their standardized test scores, granted, the test is given in English, we can give reasons why we think they are the way they are. No parent would be excited to sign up their child for those statistics. And so I'd like to see us really hone in and make sure that the students who are part of that program, or an evolution of that program, or whatever it might look like, have the same possibility for success as any other student in the district. It really concerns me that 1% of them are in TDP. It really concerns me that when they get to the junior high level, they can't take advanced math. So I think all of these components we need to unpack and work to realign. I feel the same way about our special ed group, which, as I read what's listed in the report and hear about the fact that we do not have adequate levels of, integrating them into the general population, makes me think we're doing a disservice, as it was stated, to our entire community. We're doing a disservice to the students who are in that program and those who are not in the program who aren't getting to interact with their peers. So to me, it brings me great sadness that we're not where we should be equity-wise with those groups and others we've identified tonight. But I do appreciate that you included in the presentation the Maya Angelou quote, because we do the best we can with the awareness we have, but now I think this board has a duty, now that our awareness is raised, to meet that knowledge with action and to move things in a positive direction. In terms of other pieces to speak to, I feel like the only last thing I'd say is I do feel like we've made great strides in this district before I joined the board in terms of early childhood development. And I'd like to see that we continue to give our attention to that group of kids, because I also feel like something that came up a bit in this conversation, we talked about the ELC, is the more that we can start young with addressing issues of equity, like the more it benefits while these students are within our programs. So I will stop talking now.
Well, I haven't been in this district as long as I have. Tom and I think, are probably the most experienced here. I would like to reiterate something he said before. At one point, we had 21 schools in this district. So we can't, whatever the choices we make, whatever changes we make, we have to think about the fact that the numbers go up and down depending upon when the seniors all move out or die out, and then the new families come in and we start all over again. That's an ongoing thing. And as far as changing boundaries because they happen to be moved, they were put there for a good reason at the time, the boundaries. If we're going to change a boundary, you've got to prove to me that it's really going to be worthwhile, because otherwise boundary changes to me are just too nebulous. As far as the core values, they're all wonderful, and who can argue with them? But they're also nebulous because it depends upon what they actually mean. And I think that, I don't know if we need it for every one of our programs, but certainly for some of the things that we're working on, I don't think we could change or have a particular goal for disability children, because that's such a broad range. But certainly on this dual language, if that's what we're going to continue, we need to have a specific goal in mind, and we have to know exactly how we're going to process things so that we can meet that goal. Because I don't want a goal that we can't, it's impossible to even reach. And maybe we don't need to be as broad with some of our goals as we are. So I think that might be one of my suggestions.
But I think what we're looking at is basically, we're looking for authenticity of the curriculum, because you're right, something gets lost in the translation, always. I said that last time. You look at a movie and you get a translation and somebody looks at it and says, that's not what they're saying. You have to have something that in order for this program to have integrity and for it to have fidelity, really be done well, you have to have authentic curriculum. And I'm really hopeful and really truly believe that you will do that. I feel that. I feel your colleagues have confidence in you that will happen, and I think that's a basic but a huge change that we can make that will help a lot of the students in this district. And I think it'll pull out those kids that could be TDP. It'll pull out those kids that can make that transition into the sixth grade, come out of the program. I think we're going to be able to do that because we'll have the authentic program that will do that for the kids. And as far as moving any kind of boundaries or lines, I think we can make me, myself, I am in favor of something as far as like doing something that brings the grades together, the teachers together, to be able to collaborate, and even that would help transportation. I got news for you, because transportation will be a better thing if you've got the kids with a shorter distance to travel. And so that's my 2 cents.
I also, just adding on, I do think any major changes like we've been talking about here should come to the board first, because in the past, we were not always included in the major changes that have gone on in the last 5 or 10 years.
But I think we're looking for transparency, so I don't see that we
Some of the things that were done strictly by administration and with the board not being involved at all.
One more thing before I forget to, with number 3 and communication and collaboration, and this is Robert again. The, one of the equity audit, one of the findings was that we need to do a better job as a district with two-way communication. The dual language audit had a parent focus group, Spanish only, 0 parents participated in that. So if here we're having these discussions on how do we improve the education for our one-way dual language students, we need to have a way and a method to ask the parents and hear what they need versus just saying, here is what you need. You know what I mean? Of asking, how do we get you the resources that you need? And that's difficult.
Didn't they say there wasn't enough time given to actually build a group?
Yeah, but there were 2 groups.
Yeah, there were 2 groups.
Yeah.
So the second one was better, but still not as much as we would actually like. As much as we would actually like, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's still very small. I mean, I think the numbers, I think if I remember right in the audit report, there were 3,000 students that are enrolled in the dual language program. Joshua, am I right or wrong, give or take? That's almost half of the kids that we have here. So it's there should be a proportionate involvement from those parents. If they speak only Spanish, or if they speak only English, or if they speak both, but figuring out how we as a district communicate with them and get feedback from them as well.
Another thing that I've been hearing is we're having a lot more discipline problems in the junior high level. Why? We have to look into that and see what we can do about it also, because it's spilling over into the community. And maybe it's all part of what's going on in our lives, I don't know, but whatever we can do to nip it in the bud at the junior high level, we should.
So I would just like to say, as far as looking at these 3 audits, the first thing I want to say is thank you for not being afraid to look at things that look bad, right? Because there's a tendency in education to just always say, oh, the studies show us that this is the best way to do things, and you need to actually check your own data and see, is it really working for our community? So that's the first thing. This is part of, I think, Terry's brought this attitude of continuous improvement, right? We're always going to be getting better. It's going to take time, but you're always trying to do better and better throughout. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is there are things that come out of these reports that are fundamentally unfair. When you have a lottery to determine which students get to participate in which program, and that affects the next 6 years of their education, coming down to a coin flip is not equitable. It's not even just not equitable, it's just unfair, right? And so that's one thing that strikes me. The other is it takes 5 years to reach English proficiency, sort of the goal, right? Meanwhile, we have students who don't have access to the TDP program during those 5 years. So I've got the next Einstein who's sitting in a classroom but can't advance because they started off speaking Spanish. That's fundamentally unfair, right? And same thing with special ed. We don't necessarily have as much special ed programs for the dual language students. This is 44%, 50% of our students. And again, they're waiting then 5 years to get the help they need. So I think I'm happy to see that we're addressing it. There's a lot of issues that are going to come up. It's going to take a long time to figure out the correct way to fix it. But I do not think it meets the standard of every student getting what they need to reach the high standards we should be setting for everyone.
What I like, Joe, is when you first came in, you said, I want to see the good and the bad. That sticks with me. And I think that's what we've really tried to do. And so looking at the good and bad, we can fix things. If we're just looking at the positive things, we're just like, where are we going?
Yeah, and the teachers who made the comments in the reports we saw who felt like they're kind of on their own, they need to know, you may feel that way now, but we're going to figure out a way to get there, right? We're going to come and bring you the resources you need. We're going to get you the help you need. And I think that's just part of everybody coming together to improve things.
Can I ask you, Terry, real quick? Now, when my kids were in elementary in the TDP program, they started screening. They started actually in the program in 3rd grade. Is that still? where they start is in 3rd grade?
But they also start in, like, some kids will get, they call it almost like enrichment, when they started some groups at a younger age as well, too.
Well, still, so you start in third, fourth, and fifth. That's 3 years of TDP development that
Right,
you're missing
right,
out
right.
on. It-
I was just wondering if that's
Yeah.
when we still.
Yeah, and that's pretty standard practice
Okay.
across, for identification purposes, starts
yeah,
at 3rd grade.
It relies on the COGAT, which is English only, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay, well, obviously this is a lot. When I was just a normal parent, I feel like I'm not a normal parent anymore. I thought our district was, I mean, I still think it's amazing. I thought we were in a really, really good place. Now, after reading all of this, I felt the same way as Courtney. I was actually really sad when I heard how our teachers were feeling, especially the teachers in a dual program. I really thought that we were in a really, really good place compared to other districts, right? And just like I said last time, you know, translation isn't the solution. It doesn't have that flavor. It doesn't feel right. Just like in the movies, you know, it's exactly that. And I truly hope that we can, and I know we will, you know, end up with something that it's actually going to teach them what they need to be taught. I'm actually really proud of everyone in this room and everyone else, and our staff and everything in our schools, because I feel like we have the right people at the right places right now. So, actually, I love you, Mr. Perdomo. I'm sorry, I just had to say it. I'm very happy you're here right now, especially right now. And I know that it's a lot, you know, that we're putting in your hands right now. And I know you're going to do an amazing job at getting us to where we have to be, you know, guiding us. And with everyone else, obviously. But, you know, it's a lot. But I know we will get there eventually, you know, and I know it's like he said, it's a 3-year plan, but hopefully we can get there before that, you know. It's just go there, just like Terry said, you know, go slow, but we'll get there.
Please forgive me if I start babbling, because I have a lot of thoughts going through my head, and I kind of want to go back to when I decided to run almost 4 years ago about this time. Almost 4 years ago. That, you know, I wanted to do what I thought was best for the kids. And when I say kids, I mean all kids. And I think there are 7 of us up here that are doing that for that reason. You, administrators, teachers, parents, have the same thought of we want to do what's best for the kids. I think this, as you know, as Daisy pointed out, this is a great district. It really is a great district. We have a great staff. That was pointed out. We have a great financial background. Our buildings are in great condition. We have this, I mean, we have the resources to do it. We just need to do it. Going back to the dual language curriculum, my daughter started a dual language program 13 years ago, and that was the problem of, you know, Spanish literature and Spanish, you know, curriculum available. And I'm kind of disappointed it hasn't been fixed yet. And that's, you know, that something has not come out that can be done because of the amount of dual language that's being taught throughout this state and throughout this country. So that's, I mean, if there's a teacher that's out there putting a curriculum together, that's what I would tell you to put together. I also want to kind of highlight, we talked about dual language, we talked about special education. And those were great needs for us. But back in, I think, November, December, we got our test results from the state. And we're also failing our gen ed kids too. So as part of this process, and as we're looking at this, we can't lose sight of that. We need to do what's best for all the students. Definitely, I know the dual language, the one-way dual language and special ed really need that extra attention. But we also have to give attention to those kids that we're failing. We are not at that 80-20 model that we've programmed with, you know, between tier 1 and tier 2 and stuff like that. We are not there as a district, and we need to get there. I'm not going to go back and, you know, say what they did, you know, 2-4 years ago was right or wrong. But I'm going to say right now is this is the cards that we're dealt. And this is what we need to do for our students and for our district and for our community. Because in 20 years, these kids are going to be the ones that are going to be taking care of us when we're old and whatever, and supporting us. So we need to do what's best for all students. And so I'm kind of on my high horse. I really am glad we are doing this. I think it is an important work. It's probably the most important thing we'll do as a board together. And as we stay united and work together to do this, I have complete faith that we will come out with the best resolution for our district, and we will become a model for other districts to follow. Because we have that knowledge, we have that ability, we have that want and the desire. So I'm glad I charge ahead. We'll whatever we decide, whatever we present, we'll come up with, we'll support, we'll question you, we'll challenge you, and we'll come up with the best solution for this district. So that's kind of my thing. If anybody else wants to add anything, please go ahead.
Yeah, this is Robert again. It all comes down to, if we wanted the dual language program to be the gold standard across all of our neighboring districts here in the state, what's missing? What is stopping us from doing that? So it's identifying what those pieces are. And I wanted to kind of also add on to something Courtney asked earlier, with kind of like not just curriculum, but the culturally relevant materials and going deeper beyond the surface. And not just, we see it a lot in the corporate world of Cinco de Mayo, we have a taco party. We did it, checkbox, And it's going deeper beyond just that top layer as far as the culturally relevant materials. Because you look at a lot of what was said in the audit of these students that go to the schools, and there's nothing in the schools that reflect a dual language presence in the schools. So put yourself in the shoes of that student. You don't speak English very well. You may not. And now you're here every single day. Do you really feel welcome? So it's really kind of, that's what really stuck out to me. Just a lot of the words that are in these audits. Challenging work conditions, inequitable outcomes are leading to inequitable opportunities for students. I mean, these are eye-opening statements that are coming out in this audit. So, no, a lot of work to do, a lot of work to come, but it's good that we are doing the work.
I just want to speak briefly. This is Courtney, and invite our community who may be listening, whether it's a parent, community member, teacher. I'm sure that myself as a board member and we as a board did not spot every item we could out of these reports. I'm thrilled that it's all going to be publicly available starting tomorrow. So I just want to encourage you, while we remain in this phase of not jumping to solutions, but actually sitting with the data, if you have observations about the data that you wish to share with us, I would welcome those. And you can direct them to my board email, direct them to Randy and I as president and vice president. We'll be happy to share them with the full board to collect them. But we want this to be a representation of the community's insight and not just, these consultants, the administration, and the board. So I really do invite you to share observations or thoughts that you have.
I'd like to add on to that. I appreciate the comments, and I will share with other board members. I may not respond depending on the volume of them. It's one of my jobs as a board president to respond to all emails that are received. I may or may not respond just because of the sheer volume, but we will definitely be forwarding them onto the board, and we will be reading them and taking them into consideration. So, yes, one thing that was not pointed out was we do want the community involvement, because this is, I don't know what's the word we're saying. A school makes a community. A community makes a school, almost. So I think that's important. And I do want to, I know I kind of glossed over the importance of dual language when I went back to the gen eds kids, but I was really proud to see the dual language teachers here in support of Joshua. It just goes to show what he's accomplished in his 6 months here. I also want to recognize Dr. Bresnahan for the last six months and 24 days, which is a joke, and just how much we've accomplished in that time frame. And we have a long way to go still, but I'll honestly say my job right now is to be the district cheerleader and I will be the cheerleader because I think we are doing the right.
I want to ask, Josh, I taught history for 25 years. What I wanted always to do was cross over different cultures into the history I taught, because those kids are in my classroom. When I would bring up the Aztec Eagles from World War II, kids were like, oh man, they had no idea. I want to be able to cross over and bring in those cultures to make those kids really connect and be able to identify with it. So that's, and does that sound like a solution? Or is that?
Well, I will say
what I'm really asking is, can we do something like that?
Yes, and what I will say is that one of the things we didn't even mention that's already in the works, and it began last year before me, was really looking at culturally and linguistically responsive teaching. These are the ongoing things. So while tonight may have stung and created some sadness and some surprise, and I felt it, believe me, this entire team has felt it as we've gone through this work. These were not easy conversations for those who have been here and been a part of it. It is not about looking backward and pointing fingers. It's about understanding how things came to be so that we can do better. And I really value the people that are here, because I never would have come here if I did not think we had everything we needed to move forward. And to me, with the changeover in the board and just that right amount of fresh perspective, balanced with history, balanced with the dedication of the people that work here and the community members that live here, is that we need clarity of purpose and we need high levels of accountability. And those two things together are going to absolutely pave the way for where we're going. And, thank you, Randy. I do think we are already seeing it. There is so much that is already going on that is moving us closer to it. These bigger, harder decisions to really get us that momentum, that's going to fall on your shoulders as board members. So we are going to have a very comprehensive communication outreach to engage more families and to ensure that their voices are heard, because no one should feel like any of this is happening to them. This is happening with them and for them. And that's a core value of mine and part of my mission in being here. But I have zero doubts that we have the right people in this organization that are passionate, dedicated, and that came across in all of the audits. We have them. They need to hear the support from all of you, and they need the unity of voice. When we have discord and contradicting directions, we are going to fail. And so that unity and asking those questions that challenge us are absolutely what we need to get us moving forward.
Any
I
last
did a lot of research
go
over
for-
the weekend on internet about bilingualism and dual language, et cetera, and I didn't put it in paper copies because I know the rest of you prefer to go into the website. So, but I will let you know about the website and where it is so that you can read about it before we meet again on this situation. And I do have one copy that I'm sending down. Terry, I have yours here.
Thank you.
And then this is an article by McCullough, who is this very strong leader in history of our nation. And this is from a conference that I attended, a national conference. He said that the schools must do a better job of teaching history. So as we are continuing with our talks on curriculum and so forth, this might be something that we should consider.
So if we have no more comments, questions, clarification, I want to say thank you to everyone for their hard work.
I'm gonna make another copy.
We got a long way to go, though. We still got a long way to go. But we will get there. We will get there together. Can I get a motion to go into closed session?
I move that we go in, this is Courtney Lang, I move that we go into closed session for the discussion of considering information regarding the appointment, employment, or dismissal of an employee or officer, to consider the purchase or lease of real property for the use of the public body, to consider a student discipline, residency, transportation matter, or to consider pending litigation.
I will second. Any questions? Roll call?
Lang,
Aye.
Mencia,
Aye.
Petrielli, aye. Reed,
Aye.
Sager,
Aye.
Schumacher,
Aye.